Well, welcome everyone. This is one of my favorite nights of the entire year. I am Mayor Stewart, and I am here to say that we are not starting our council meeting yet. We are here for the Laguna Middle School Community Services Awards. And I just want to say, before we kick it off and share everyone's names, I just want to say thank you to everyone that's in the room, all of the students who gave your time into this community. That is so huge. I hope you continue this through life, not just through high school and for the college admissions, but really being a part of the community as a part of your life is something that will make, I think, your life a lot better, as well as the community that you live in the future, whether it's here or somewhere else. So thank you so much. I'm going to pass it right over to Mila, or Miss Labar.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Stewart and City Council. Again, my name is Mila Vujovic Labar, and I've had the great pleasure of teaching in the school district for 41 years here in San Luis Coastal. I've been active in the community as a volunteer, and it's brought me an immense amount of joy. My personal experience was the inspiration for starting the Mayor's Award for Community Service, first at San Luis Obispo High School and then at Laguna Middle School. These programs were started years ago with the support of Alan Settle and Mayor Romero, and it's wonderful to have the continued support of you, Mayor Stewart, and City Council members to see that this important award continues for our hardworking teens. On behalf of Laguna Middle School Principal Nathan Meinert, Vice Principals Elizabeth Den and Chris Jones, and the certificated and clerical staff, I would first like to thank you, Mayor Stewart, for honoring the over 57 caring souls here. Earlier, they were presented with a certificate and a community service pin by Police Chief Rick Scott, which was wonderful. And it's indeed a pleasure to have witnessed the metamorphosis of these dedicated teens who completed 30 hours or more of community service. And one stellar student, Jillian Stewart, completed over 300 hours. Yay! These volunteer hours were made possible by the nonprofits in the community that continue to welcome student volunteers and the parents who entrusted their children to other positive adult mentors in the community. Through volunteering, many of these young people have honed their interpersonal and organizational skills. In addition, they have improved their time management and critical thinking skills, which will serve them well in the future. Their volunteer hours also provided them with self-confidence and hands-on skills that they might not have an opportunity to be exposed to in the classroom. The actions of the students are, in a sense, the very fibers of our strong, vital, healthy, and safe community. Many people are familiar with the words of a great president, John F. Kennedy, who stated the famous words, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." These middle school students have demonstrated that they understand that directive. The honorees for this year are, and students, I'm going to have you raise your hand and give us a big parade wave, right? When I say your name, thank you. Caitlin Peterson, Aiden Giddicky, Riley James, Carolyn Juretic, Mason Kostelnick, Chase Neisnick, Hattie Bramer, Eliana Spearing, Claire Noland, Jude Escobar, Adeline Olson, Simone Alcorn, Annalene Rawlings, Natalie Schultz, Layla Shamsky, Madeline Volk. Give us a wave. Madeline, where are you? There, we got a wave. Okay, here we go. Gianna Senor, Venezia Ramirez, Francis Frankie Morrow, Jessa Labed, June Bryan, Eleanor Sewer, Avery Schuberg, Will Bates, Rafael Torres Siong, Emery Sarabia, Leilani Gross, Jillian Stewart, Reese Garrett, Dilshan Singh, Maui Alonso Palt, Bidu Ashley, Aaliyah Mercurio, Violet Aron, Fernanda Garcia, Arden Broussard, Cole Funk, Dylan Aquino, Dublin Martin, Soleil Hopkins, Max Bivens, Mason Kaufman, Nailene Lopez, Violet Kolesnikov, Ellison Gallagher, Alice Amos, Ushma Pandey, Milo Woods, Nathan McRoberts, Naomi Safika, Phoebe Cross, Jack Herring, Garrett McRoberts, Braden Siritas, Joran Forrester, Akalia Mazuka, Allison Resendez. I feel like I'm missing one. Am I missing one? No, we're all good. Let's give these students a round of applause. In closing, anthropologist Margaret Mead once said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed people can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that has." Mayor Stewart and City Council members, thank you so much for allowing me to highlight the efforts of our wonderful teens. They are our future. Their integrity, determination, passion, and compassion should give everyone great hope and optimism. Thank you very much for having us here this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all that you have all done. Thank you, Ms. Labar. And I just want to say one last thing is I hope that you all enjoy being part of this community even a little bit longer in this next couple of years. I think really when you look at nonprofits, they are continuing to be such a big part of your lives for this community service, and I hope that the nonprofits can continue to do such a thing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I didn't know if any of you would like to come down and have pictures with the students. That would be super awesome. So you can come mill about if you want and meet some of these young teens. So parents, you can get your phones out and shoot away. There we go.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Mayor Stewart, and I'm here to say that all of the city council members are present, and I'm going to pass it over to Councilmember Francis for the pledge. Thank you. So sometimes we get to start off our meeting with a little something fun, and today kicks off the month of May, obviously, and there are so many observances. I believe it was the County of SLO Behavioral Health who posted just a handful of some of the observances that are happening in May. So I'm excited to be able to share the National Foster Care Month today, and after I share the proclamation, I will meet Amanda Briley down at the podium so she can share a few things as well. So whereas the City of San Luis Obispo is committed to ensuring all children have safe, stable, and loving homes when they cannot remain with their biological families. More than 420,000 children nationwide, including over 28,000 in California, are currently in the foster care home or foster care system. Over 200 children and youth in the County of San Luis Obispo are in foster care. The County of San Luis Obispo's Department of Social Services continues to actively recruit more resource families to ensure children have nurturing homes in which they can heal, grow, and thrive. National Foster Care Month recognizes the critical role of resource families in providing nurturing, stable homes and highlights the ongoing need for more families to support local children. This month-long effort, which is mirrored across all 50 states and the District of Columbia, celebrates resource families and encourages more individuals to positively impact a child's life through foster care. Now, therefore, I, Erica A. Stewart, Mayor of the City of San Luis Obispo, on behalf of the entire City Council, proclaim May as National Foster Care Month and encourage all community members to join in raising awareness and supporting foster care and resource families in our community.
Good afternoon. I'm Amanda Briley, and I'm a social worker with SLO County Child Welfare Services. I would like to begin by thanking SLO City Council for presenting the Department of Social Services with this proclamation. During the month of May, we are incredibly proud to honor all of our county's resource and adoptive families, as well as all of the county staff and community partners that support these families. Foster care is a critical safety net for any community. When a child's home environment is deemed unsafe, they may be placed with a resource family, which could be a relative, a non-related extended family member, or a certified community-based home. These families provide safe, caring, and stable environments while the child's biological family works towards reunification. The resource families are an essential component of our ability to care for youth in foster care. Unfortunately, like many counties across the state, we are experiencing a severe shortage of resource families. This means fewer opportunities to match children with families that best meet their specific needs, which can lead to placement disruptions or compounding existing trauma. Last May, the Department of Social Services launched the 7525 initiative with a goal of developing 75 new community-based resource family homes by the end of 2025. This included 25 homes for teens, 25 homes for school-aged children aged 6 to 12, 15 homes for children ages 0 to 5, 7 emergency foster care homes, and 3 shelter homes. Currently, we have secured 35% of our overall goal, but need this community's support to reach our goal by year's end. If successful, this initiative will transform our ability to provide better placement matches for youth in care, support existing resource families, and strengthen our overall foster care system. We are calling on the entire County of San Luis Obispo to rally behind this effort. We encourage interested individuals to attend one of our bi-monthly virtual information meetings to learn more about how they can help by calling 805-781-1705 or visiting our website, slofostercare.com. Lastly, we would like to ask for the support of this City Council to help spread awareness regarding our initiative by sharing digital content and word of mouth. Together, we can reach our goal and provide essential care and stability for our county's most vulnerable children. Thank you again for recognizing May as National Foster Care Month in San Luis Obispo County.
Thank you so much for being here. So next we have the City Manager report, and City Manager, will you share what's happening in SLO?
Certainly. Thanks so much for the opportunity. We want to highlight a few items for everyone's awareness this evening. One is we want to make sure everybody is aware that there is an opportunity afoot by our downtown payment parking app called Pay by Phone. They are running a promotion. Anyone who purchases street parking downtown with the Pay by Phone app, mobile app in the month of May will automatically be entered into a chance to win $100 in parking credits. They're offering 10 of these opportunities and will be chosen at the end of the month. This is also including a sponsored digital campaign and social media ads, and we are promoting the giveaway as well in a lot of our channels. And we will also be hosting a booth at the farmers market throughout the month of May to make sure folks are aware and really taking advantage of this giveaway and also all the features that the Pay by Phone app provides. Postcards have been distributed to downtown businesses to share with patrons, and Downtown SLO will be sharing about the giveaway at their farmers market radio spot throughout the month of May as well. One additional parking item we wanted to make sure folks were aware of. Back in November, we discussed our downtown technology roadmap for our parking system, and staff began implementing a new gated system really in all of our garages with a goal of getting them transitioned over the course of this year. We are happy to say that the 842 Palm Garage has been successfully installed with a new gated system. We took out the old gateless system that was creating a lot of concern for users and installed a gated system. Have been continuing to make some modifications to that, make sure it's running smoothly. And we have decided to accelerate the time frame for changing the gates out at our other two garages, largely because a lot of issues we're having with the technology currently, including with the payment system. We've learned that the system doesn't do well with metal credit cards. So if anybody has inserted a metal credit card into the payment machine, it may have gotten kind of eaten and then had to get removed from the machine. And obviously that's not a great system for anybody to be working with during this time frame. So we've prioritized that work to happen as soon as possible, which we're really happy we believe will happen in June and potentially at the beginning of June. The trade-off with that is it's an incredibly busy time of year, including graduation, such as at Cal Poly, and we know we will be having a lot of visitors during that time frame as well. We really took the opportunity to go ahead and move forward with the work because we don't want to live with our system that's not working for any longer than we have to. We know if we do this now, we'll be able to get it done a lot sooner. It would likely wait a few more months, and we think folks will probably be equally frustrated with having their credit cards eaten by the machine and other issues that we're having with the gates currently. So we'll have a lot of extra staff out during this time frame to help with people during the process. The gates and the garages will all be accessible during the work. We'll make sure that there's at least a lane open to go in and out of the structures. But there may be some, amount of delay for people. We just wanted to make sure folks were aware that this is something we are planning to move forward with. We are engaging with our partners as well downtown, so they are aware and can help get the word out. So I wanted to take the opportunity to highlight it here too. Next, we wanted to make sure everyone is aware that our summer camp registration period is upon us for a lot of our summer parks and recreation programs. So there's lots of different sports opportunities that are up here on the screen, and we hope that everybody takes a look, takes advantage, finds something that's going to work. Piece together their summer camp program for their kids during this upcoming summer and really get out and enjoy their time. So please take a look at our sloparksandrec.org website or call at 805-781-7300. We also have a couple of events to highlight with our fire department coming up. One is this Thursday, which is our annual bike breakfast. It's being held Thursday, May 8th from 7 to 8:30 a.m. at Station 1. If you ride your bike on over, you can get some pancakes from our fire department who are really helping to promote Bike Month, which is the month of May, and to participate and just say hi to some of our fire department staff who are there to assist. We are also hosting a wildfire preparedness community forum on May 22nd. This is in anticipation of a public hearing we will be holding on June 3rd to discuss the new fire hazard severity zone maps that the state released that we will need to be adopting, and opportunities to hear about preparedness, home hardening, defensible space, and the next steps we will be taking with those maps, adoption, and some of the programs that we'll be doing, and to come and get your questions answered about a lot of those different requirements and, again, programs that we'll be implementing in the coming year plus, because it's going to take us a while to make sure we're up to speed completely. So if you have any questions and for more information, can go to slowcity.org/wildfire. Next, we wanted to highlight another opportunity coming up this week, actually just tomorrow evening on Wednesday, May 7th from 4 to 7 p.m. at the Octagon Barn. This is related to a San Luis Obispo County Arts Council report that was just released last week called Economic Impact of Arts and Culture in San Luis Obispo County. I think you might have seen some press coverage on this as well to help to evaluate and quantify the effects of arts in our community and all the benefits that it brings to us, including economic benefits. This collaborative project, again released last week on May 1st, marks the first such report in a decade. It came about through a partnership with the city, as well as the city of Paso Robles and the San Luis Obispo County Arts Council. The report found that the city of San Luis Obispo had 1.1 million people in arts and culture attendees in fiscal year 2024, with $99 million in arts and culture related visitor spending and $163 million in total economic impact. I think that's a lot to celebrate. And so there's an event to kind of learn about the report and a kind of discussion that will be held, and folks can come out and hear more tomorrow night at the Octagon Barn. And then next, we just wanted to highlight a few items that will be coming up on our next regular council meeting, which will be held on May 20th. We will have our Q3 budget report. Want to just especially highlight advertisement for the Rigetti Community Park construction. So this is long awaited. We know the community has been asking about it and needing us to move forward with building this park. This will be the biggest and most significant investment in the phases of the park that we're going to need to roll out. Because of cost escalations, we're not able to fund the build out of the entire park system in one go, but this will be the major piece of the community park that includes playing fields, playgrounds, restrooms, and the major components of where our kids and other folks can come out and play and enjoy the space. So we're really excited to move that forward, and we anticipate construction starting later this year. Other items include our annual water supply and demand analysis. The slow transit open loop payment system is kind of a opaque term, but the exciting thing is this means we will be able to have folks using one payment system and card to access the bus on both the RTA and slow transit. It's actually very exciting. The term open loop payment probably doesn't sound that, but it is to us. We will have our single audit on the agenda, as well as a RFP for our new cafe kiosk at Mission Plaza. So this helps us identify a great vendor for that space. So if anybody's curious about what might go on there, please check it out. If you're interested in opening a potential cafe in Mission Plaza, please keep an eye out for that. And then finally, we'll have a public hearing to move forward with a process where we've been working with property owners who have damaged sidewalks and other frontage improvements in front of their homes. We need those to be corrected. We haven't been able to get a lot of movement with a few people, and so this is a process that we'll undertake. If the city needs to do that work, then we would seek to recover those costs from the property. And then finally, consideration of a committee of the council to review our election campaigns regulations and or council compensation, which is the standard timeframe set out in our rules for that possibility. So that's it for my city manager report and our next agenda.
Thank you. That is a big deal on May 20th, so I look forward to that conversation, something that we've been talking about since at least when I got on council in 18. So any questions for city manager? All right, without further ado, we'll move forward. Thank you for all of those reports. So now is the time for anything that is not on the agenda. So if it's not on consent, not on public hearing or business items, if you have a comment you'd like to make, this is that time. City Clerk, do you already have any commenters?
I have none for this item.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, so moving forward, we'll go to the consent agenda. Councilmember Marks.
Yes, I'm going to recuse myself from item 6D, which is a annual monitoring report for the San Luis Ranch Development Agreement, mitigation measures, and project conditions. Since I live in San Luis Ranch, I'm going to not vote on that item.
Perfect, thank you. Anyone else? All right, do we have any public comment for items on the consent agenda?
No, we do not.
All right, with that, I'll move the consent agenda. Do we have a second? Councilmember Francis?
I will second.
Thank you. Can we have roll call?
Mayor Stewart?
No, you just recuse yourself from.
Mayor Stewart?
Yes.
Councilmember Francis?
Yes.
Councilmember Boswell?
Yes.
Councilmember Marks? Yes, except I'm going to abstain from 6D. Vice Mayor Shorsman?
Yes.
Thank you, and that motion passes 5-0 with the exception of 6D, where Councilmember Marks has recused herself. All right, we'll move forward to the business items. We have quite a few today. We have 3 pretty large business items today. We will take a few breaks in them, so just to give everyone a feel in the room of what will happen. First, we have the annual Cannabis Business Program update. We're receiving this as an update and then also potentially introducing an ordinance to amend Municipal Code Section 17.86.080 cannabis. And with that, Ivana Gomez.
My name is Ivana Gomez. I'm the Cannabis Business Coordinator for the city, and tonight I'll be presenting the annual Cannabis Program Update, which is a chance every year for staff to brief the council on the progress of the program, as well as to suggest any policy or regulatory updates. At the last update in May of 2024, there were no urgent changes necessary. However, this year staff will be introducing some clarifying amendments to Section 178680 of the Municipal Code, also known as the Cannabis Zoning Regulations. So the recommendation tonight is to receive an update on the city's cannabis program, as well as to introduce an ordinance to amend Section 178680 of the Municipal Code to clarify specific land use and operational requirements for commercial cannabis activity. So commercial cannabis operator permits. Here's kind of a landscape of where we are currently. So the city currently has 2 cannabis operators, both of which are retail storefronts. That's Megan's Organic Market at 280 Higuera and Slow Cow Roots at 3535 South Higuera, with a 3rd permit conditionally awarded to Embark in 2024 as a result of the application period opened in 2023. That permit, also a retail storefront permit, is currently inactive due to a pending appeal of its conditional use permit scheduled for council review on July 1st of this year. Because there is a 3 retail storefront permit limit in the city cannot accept new retail storefront applications until that appeal is resolved. In addition, there has been no interest from other cannabis business types, so non-retail storefront, as far as interest expressed in a new application period. So for those reasons, staff did not recommend opening a new application period for this year. However, if one were to be opened, it would need to occur in July, and it is subject to city manager approval. current fee and tax rate structure. So here is just an overview of the city's current fee and tax rate structure for cannabis. There's really only one new fee as of the October 2024 fee update, and that is the approximately $14,000 cannabis transfer of ownership fee. So that's for transfer of ownership requests, and this fee is based on just staff time that's required to process these types of requests. Cannabis tax rates, however, remain unchanged from the inception of the program, and these taxes are collected on a monthly cadence. So with that, here's a look at the city's tax revenue from 2021 through 2025. The revenue that the city receives from cannabis business taxes are allocated to the city's general fund, which then supports things like public safety and community services. So looking at 2025, the actualized amount reflects the first 3 quarters of the fiscal year, and the city is on track to meet or fall just slightly below that budgeted amount of $1.1 million. That $1.1 million budget, as you can see, has been consistent for the past few years, and we've met that regardless of the number of operators at any given time. Unlike tax revenue, permit fee revenue, so revenue collected from annual operator permit renewals, transfer of ownership fees, or new application fees, are intended to fully cover program costs. So unlike the tax revenue, that goes into recovering staff and consultant time. And for this year, roughly $100,000 in revenue has been collected from those 2 active operators renewing their cannabis operator permits. Okay, now moving on to the proposed amendments. So here's a summary of the proposed amendments before we get started. So first, we'll be looking into some clarifying language for land use requirements for retail storefront operations, specifically around the buffer requirements. Second, we'll be looking into just removing some repetitive language that occurs throughout the cannabis zoning code. And third, we'll be looking into some clarifying language for the operational requirements for micro business operations. So the proposed amendments to land use requirements and micro business requirements are essentially cleanup items. So nothing is actually changing, but rather the updates are intended to provide greater clarity on existing regulations. Okay, so as stated, the First Amendment is intended to clarify the buffer requirements for retail storefronts. So I do want to begin by, summarizing what these buffers are, when they were adopted, and that relationship between the buffers and cannabis overlay zones, also referred to as CBZ overlay zones. So buffers, they were adopted in May of 2018. They apply only to retail storefronts because these are the only publicly accessible business types, cannabis business types. And they are as follows. They are 1,000 feet from schools and public parks, 600 feet away from licensed daycare centers, and these storefronts must also be 300 feet away from residentially zoned areas that occur within a CBZ overlay zone. Now, what is a CBZ overlay zone? So those were adopted in September of 2018. They are 9 designated areas in the city where all cannabis businesses may operate, further subject to zoning, and they are shown very clearly on the city's zoning map. It's also worth noting that they do account for these buffers, these pre-established buffers, so they were essentially chosen and designated because they were largely away from these sensitive uses. They also account for local conditions such as roads and railroads, so when a sensitive use does somewhat overlap into an overlay zone, there is usually a major barrier, so something like Broad Street or the railroad tracks that would provide the equivalent of a buffer. So here's kind of a look at one of the CBZ overlay zones. As I mentioned, there are 9. And the interpretation that the 300-foot buffer applies to residentially zoned areas within that within CBZ overlay zones is demonstrated very clearly on the adopted zoning map. So this was adopted in 2018 with the cannabis regulations, and then amended in 2023 to include some annexed areas near the airport. At the time, there were only 2 areas in the city where residential zoning occurs within a CBZ overlay zone. It was here in South Broad, and there was a zone in the airport area that was also zoned residential, but it has since been rezoned to service commercial. And so for that reason, the updated map specifically calls out that 300 buffer area from residential zones within the South Broad CBZ. So that said, staff is recommending some clarifying language throughout the code where these buffer requirements are mentioned, just to establish that the 1,000-foot buffer and the 600-foot buffer apply whether that sensitive use is located within or outside of a CBZ overlay zone. However, the 300-foot buffer from residentially zoned areas applies only when that residentially zoned area occurs within a CBZ overlay zone. The reason this is as well when this was adopted in 2018 is because the city has tons of residentially zoned areas. We are very pro-housing. We have residentially zoned areas apply to R1, R2, R3, and R4 zones. If that buffer were to apply to all residentially zoned areas in the city, there would be very limited space for cannabis retail storefronts to operate. And for that reason, in addition to the idea that these major railroads or barriers or arterial streets exist to further establish a buffer, this is how the buffers were established back in 2018. In addition to clarifying this buffer language, staff is also recommending to add specific language to the section 178680 to clarify that a new adjacent land use does not affect the continuation of an existing use that was issued a use permit under the standards of the cannabis regulations. So in other words, if a cannabis retail storefront becomes established at a specific location, and I don't know, 3 months later, a daycare pops up within that 600-foot buffer, that will not affect the continuation of that retail storefront. Here's just an excerpt from that September of 2018 staff report regarding the buffers and cannabis overlay zones. Back in the day, there was a state buffer of 600 feet that no longer exists. However, this does clearly show that the legislative intent was to apply that 300-foot buffer from residential zoning located just within an overlay zone. So moving away from the buffers now and into some of that repetitive language, that the term CBZ overlay is referred to as CAN overlay in section 178680 E5B. Both of these terms are interchangeable. They refer to the same zoning designation. So staff is proposing to replace the word CAN overlay with CBZ overlay such that is consistent with the city zoning map as well as the rest of the zoning regulations. Next is an amendment proposed to the purpose statement of the cannabis zoning regulations. So staff is proposing to remove the specific Controlled Substances Act or CSA classification of cannabis from the purpose statement. As many of you may be aware, the federal government has been looking at a possibility of rescheduling cannabis. This has been a conversation that's been occurring over the past couple of years, but it does remain unclear where, what direction that will go. So staff is recommending just to remove that specific schedule from that purpose statement so that it avoids having to update that section whenever the federal government does change that classification, while still reinforcing that the provisions of the cannabis zoning regulations are not intended and will not affect or alter federal law. Next is the proposed amendments to the operational requirements for micro businesses. As I mentioned, this is really just clarifying language. So micro businesses engage in at least 3 cannabis activities. So cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, and retail. What a micro business is just a one location that may engage in at least 3 of those following activities. So back in 2023, Ordinance 1725 was adopted, and it updated retail storefront hours to 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. And it also allowed medical access for individuals aged 18 to 20 years old with valid identification. But these changes were not applied to micro businesses that have retail sales. Which was really just an oversight because both our own municipal code as well as state law requires that micro businesses with retail sales follow the same rules as any other retailer. So staff is proposing an amendment to align micro business retail operations with the same as retail storefronts. So standardizing hours, age access rules, as well as signage requirements. And the recommendation, again, is to receive that update on the cannabis program, as well as to introduce an ordinance amending Section 178680 and clarifying specific land use and operational requirements for commercial cannabis activity. With that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you for that really clear and concise report. Any questions? Vice Mayor?
Thank you. Yeah, I was kind of looking at the map and reading some of the agenda correspondence or the questions and comments that we got from the community, and trying to kind of make sense of the overlay zone versus the buffer, the 300-foot buffer. And maybe you could just go back to the map. So, so if I'm understanding correctly, the buffer zone there, the 300 feet, it's kind of a cloud-shaped red-lined area. That's the area where a cannabis retail business within the zone cannot be, correct?
Because that's the 300-foot buffer from that R3 zoned area. And so that red striped line represents where a cannabis retail storefront cannot be.
So, but in that zone, say a little further north, one could be present even though it is maybe not 300 feet from the R1 or R2 area, correct? Because that's outside the zone.
That's correct. It's outside of the zone, and there is that major street of Broad Street, which is a 6-lane street that provides that barrier. And so when this specific CBZ zone was adopted, it was adopted with the understanding that there's the railroad as well as an arterial street like Broad Street that would provide a major barrier from residentially zoned areas that are outside of that zone.
Okay, so is this pretty common how cities do this? Is this a pretty common standard, and were other best practices looked at when we came up with this back in whenever it was 2018, I think?
Yes, so the adoption of buffer requirements is pretty common. I would say it's less common now. Back when these buffer requirements were adopted in 2018, the state had their own buffer requirements that the city was looking to kind of take inspiration from or follow. However, like I said, the state no longer has buffer requirements, and so I imagine that in recent years, cities have become a little less I guess, strict with the buffer requirements that they are, imposing on cannabis businesses.
So I think one of the emails that we got was asking that we, I don't have it in front of me, but was asking that we remove the buffer from just inside the zone and that we make it a more generalized buffer. And what are staff's thoughts about that?
Yeah, so I did read the agenda correspondence from those individuals, and I think what they are requesting would be an amendment to the entire cannabis business overlay and buffer requirements. That's certainly something that council can express interest in, but it would take a whole study session and possibly over a year to kind of reconstruct these regulations.
Thank you. I know that's not what we're talking about today, and I'm just not interested in bringing it up because I realize that would be a much bigger thing, but just wanted to see if that was something that had been looked at before or thought about.
Yes, and I'll add to Ivana's statement. It would be a significant change. We did a lot of research when this issue came up of lack of clarity in the code. It says a buffer from these things, and that's why we're saying it's important whether or not the thing is inside or outside of the cannabis zone. And so Ivana did a ton of background research looking through old staff reports to make sure that we had been consistently applying it, which we have. So since the beginning of this ordinance, this is how we have interpreted this. And our intent now is to clarify the interpretation that has always existed. I think another thing to think about, and Ivana mentioned this briefly, but if the buffer were to apply to residential zones outside the cannabis zone, you would kind of further squeeze in where cannabis stores could be located. And that's just something we'd have to look at if there was interest, but I think that's something to consider is, given the vast amount of land that we have zoned for residential, you would be further limiting the areas for cannabis businesses.
Thank you so much. That's all my questions.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, any public comment?
Yes, we have two public speakers on this item. The first one is Megan Sousa, and the second is Austin Canella.
And Austin, if you want to line up behind Megan so we can move along my public comment, that'd be great.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. My name is Megan Souza, and I'm an owner of Megan's Organic Market, which is one of the licensed storefront dispensaries here in San Luis Obispo. And first, I would like to thank staff and council for everything that you all do for supporting a safe and well-regulated cannabis program in our city. Tonight, I would like to respectfully request that the council direct staff to explore opportunities for cannabis events in the city of SLO. Specifically, I'm interested in hosting educational, wellness, and cultural events that incorporate cannabis in a responsible way, similar to how alcohol is permitted at private events, in restaurants, event venues, and other establishments. Some examples of events that I would love to do are, we've been approached by quite a few local chefs and restaurateurs who would love to do infused dinner events. I would love to do an event at Sloma that involves, cannabis mocktails instead of wine. And we would love to be able to host our annual Christmas party for our staff at the Penny, for example, and do private events at places like the Penny, wedding venues, etc. It is within the city's ability to permit cannabis events. What would be required is, of course, an update to the ordinance. And it could be done within the state's existing framework for temporary cannabis events. And so operators, it's only available to retailers and micro businesses, would apply for a temporary events permit from the Department of Cannabis Control for theirs, and then would require local approval for the specific event that we would want to host. So we would come to you all with events and you guys would approve the location and whatnot. All right, that's my request tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. My name is Austin Canella, and I'm also a licensed cannabis operator here in San Luis Obispo with SLO-Cal Roots. I also appreciate the opportunity to speak with you tonight and think the city's been a great partner in onboarding this industry. And I'd also like to highlight two opportunities that I believe deserve some study and consideration. One is allowing cannabis events within the city, and the other is permitting on-site consumption areas at licensed retail establishments. First, cannabis events. San Luis Obispo has a long tradition of hosting community-based, culturally rich, and economically impactful events. Allowing cannabis events, whether small educational gatherings, infused dinner pairings, or even larger vendor fairs, would not only generate direct tax revenue, but also support local jobs, artists, and small businesses. More importantly, it would give our city a platform to lead responsibly in normalizing legal cannabis use, promoting safe access, and removing the stigma that still unfairly shadows this regulated industry. Other jurisdictions like Santa Rosa, Grover Beach, and Sacramento have successfully implemented cannabis event permits. There's even been an event at one of our state fairs there in Sacramento, proving that it can be done safely and thoughtfully. Second, I urge the council to explore the possibility of allowing on-site consumption areas at licensed cannabis retailers. This is about equity, public safety, and responsible use. Visitors and residents alike are legally allowed to purchase cannabis, but in many cases, they have nowhere to legally consume it. This creates confusion, pushes people into consume in public spaces or vehicles, and penalizes those who don't own private property locally. On-site consumption lounges, especially in a regulated, ventilated, and ID-verified environment, are a harm reduction strategy that encourages legal, moderate, and educational use. They are also open the door for tourism, innovation from educational educational sessions to curated tasting experience, all of which benefit our local economy. We're not asking for a rush decision. We're simply requesting that the City Council initiate a thoughtful, inclusive study of these topics, engage stakeholders, public health experts, law enforcement, business owners, and community members, and assess what a responsible framework could look like for San Luis Obispo. This has always been a city rooted in balance, innovation, and tradition, growth and quality of life, and I believe we can extend that legacy into how we approach cannabis. So once again, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you to both of you for the ideas. With that, Councilmember Francis, do you have a question?
Yeah, I would just like to follow up with staff to seek a little bit of clarification about what the process would look like if the council were interested in exploring either of those options that were mentioned by the speakers.
Yeah, so as far as cannabis events can go, these are events where people can sell and consume cannabis on site. They can be anywhere from 1 to 4 days at a location approved by the city. And to host an event, an applicant like Megan or Austin would need to have a cannabis event organizer license from the DCC or the Department of Cannabis Control, as well as a temporary cannabis event license. As far as code amendments, we currently do have a no consumption on site language in various parts of the municipal code, including Chapter 9.10, the cannabis regulations, as well as the cannabis zoning regulations. So we'd be looking at some proposed amendments to each of those sections. And I think I will also invite Director Tway just to follow up on the types of studies that would need to be done to propose those types of amendments.
Thank you, Ivana. I think in terms of taking a cursory look at what this would take, and if that's something that's of interest to the city, that's something we could do. If it gets beyond that into, outreach and thinking through overhauls of the program or things that may impact our need to do more permitting and things, if this were changed, that would get more into work program territory. And so I think we can definitely take a look at that and maybe think about what it would take to do something like this and provide that information to council. But in terms of just jumping into it, that would be another discussion about what resources we would need if we really wanted to go in that direction, to think through how do we implement that in a way that we can wrap our arms around these changes and make sure we're doing it well for the community.
And we're pretty far along as far as the budget and the work plan process. Is that a part of, sorry, I'm trying to think about the best way to say this. Would this be a part of the conversation you would already be having for the work plan for the budget meeting?
This would be, so the cannabis program is within the planning division, and the planning division is the division doing a lot of the heavy lifting for the housing items and things. We do this annual report, and so a lot of Ivana's work is gearing up for the annual report, so it's something we can look at as part of the annual report. But in terms of the work program of the planning division, we have a lot of other things going on, but we can explore it at a high level.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Marks.
Yeah, I would hope that you'd also look at any possible conflict with like our no smoking ordinance and other ordinances that might be out there when you do it. But I think it should come back in a year. I think that would be good. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Shorsman. Oh, sorry, City Manager. I just clicked on your button first.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Are we sure? I don't want to jump in the game. Okay. I think just if we do receive direction to essentially create, I mean, it's not a brand new program, right? Because we're talking continued, it's a different type of cannabis use, I suppose. But this kind of regulation would be very new for our city. And so I do think that this is likely one of those situations where if this was the priority, we would need to look at taking another priority off of the list because of the amount of work involved with standing up a different type of use like this. So it's just trying to judge priorities, and they do include a number of the housing items that we talked about in April. And I'm trying to think of I can't even list all of the things going on in your department over the next couple of years. But certainly Ivana has been assisting the department as a whole in their both current planning and I believe some of the long-range planning items as well. So we would just need to, there's a likelihood we would need something else to fall off to slot this one in.
Yeah, I was assuming there would be some sort of trade-off, especially since we've been talking about multifamily homes and smoking, and that's just kind of like a whole different work plan over here. So, okay, thank you. Vice Mayor?
Thank you. Yeah, I think I was going to try to seek a little bit of clarification too, maybe from Director Tway about what you meant. I guess I was hearing you say maybe a memo or something exploring at a high level and not necessarily, you know, a study session or an addition to the work plan. So what is it that you actually think that you could realistically have the capacity to do around this?
I think realistically, we could look into it and say, here's what other cities do, here's what it would take for us to have a successful program, you know, to the city manager's point. I think it's easy sometimes to look at this and say, well, you just have to scratch out this language, but we would want to look at other cities that have successfully done it. And there are some that have done it for longer than others to say, what does this actually take? And so to provide that information, and then I think, you know, maybe at the next annual report, you have that knowledge and can make a decision of, is that something we want to further pursue? But like very high level, sort of beyond the code amendments, what would it take to do this type of work?
Yes, okay, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that. I would be supportive if the group wants to, you know, ask for that level of activity, but I am concerned about derailing the work program that we've been working on for the last several months, and would be happy to talk to the cannabis retailers more about, you know, what that might look like in a future year.
Thank you. Yes, and I think as I think about the last 8 months that we've been working on the work plans and the budgets, it's kind of hard to think about shifting. But I do think if we were to do a memo, when you think about cities, there are cities in California, but also cities that are cannabis allowed in other states that it would be logical to look at too, because I know there are some that have done it well in other states as well. So, all right. With that, we have a few updates to approve in this. So is there a motion to approve and introduce the ordinance? Councilmember Marks.
Yes, I think this is, it's basically a cleanup provision, and I think you've done a good job, and your staff has done a good job on this. So I would like to move to receive the update, which we've done, and then introduce an ordinance entitled, "An Ordinance of the City Council of the City of San Luis Obispo, California, amending Section 17.86.080 of the Municipal Code to clarify specific land use and operational requirements for commercial cannabis activity."
Thank you, Councilmember Boswell.
Second.
Thank you. And I also want to really echo Councilmember Marks, the way that you've had the simple streamlining on this report, made it very clear to see what was changing. I think that's really helpful for the community as well. So thank you for that. Can we have roll call, please?
Councilmember Marks?
Yes.
Councilmember Boswell?
Yes.
Councilmember Francis?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Shorsman?
Yes.
Mayor Stewart?
Yeah, so the motion passes 5-0. Thank you for the report, and thank you for the conversation too, for the community's businesses and where we could possibly go from here. So we'll take just a little bit of a break, just about a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back to talk about 7B, which is the introducing an ordinance amending the airport area specific plan to allow mixed-use residential development within the service, commercial, and manufacturing zones. We'll hear from Director Timmy Tway, Planner Rachel Cohen, and Planner John Rickenbach. Thank you for the quick break. I look forward to hearing from Rachel and John. We'll pass it on to item 7B.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. I'm John Rickenbach, and tonight we're going to be following up on Planning Commission hearing regarding the airport area specific plan, and tonight we're going to be introducing an ordinance to amend that plan to allow mixed-use development within the CS and M zones, subject to a conditional use permit. So the recommendation will start and end with this. As recommended by the Planning Commission, it would be to introduce an ordinance that says the following. I'll just read it verbatim. An ordinance of the City Council of the City of San Luis Obispo, California, amending the airport area specific plan to allow mixed-use development in the service, commercial, CS, and manufacturing M zones, subject to a conditional use permit where appropriate and consistent with the airport area specific plan, including adoption of an addendum to the final environmental impact report for the airport area and Margarita area specific plans and related facility master plans. A mouthful. So I just want to briefly go through how we got here and what the specifics are that you're considering and why there are certain things about it that you may have questions about. The basis of this is rooted in the major city goal related to housing and homelessness, which is basically to provide as much housing as possible and to address homeless issues. There is a specific work program that falls out of that, which was to amend the airport area specific plan to allow for mixed use. There are a number, and that's what we're embarking on today. So we're following that, and those are in the last 2-3 years. There are housing element programs that relate to this. 5.5 is to allow for mixed-use development in the CS and M zones, which has been implemented elsewhere in the city. I'll explain in a bit why it hasn't been done here. Then another housing element, 6.13 program encourages mixed-use development in commercial and manufacturing zones. Finally, land use element policy 3.85 encourages compatible mixed uses in commercial districts. Everything points to this action being consistent with previous city policy and direction. So by background here, the airport area specific plan was adopted in 2005, and it provides the regulatory framework for about 1,200 acres near the airport. That plan allowed uses and development standards that were guided, and this is important, by the 2002 airport land use plan, which had a whole set of different rules than the one that was recently updated, which I'll get into in a bit. The airport land use plan at that time limited or prohibited residential, non-residential development. That, of course, guided the airport area specific plan here. Well, in 2020, the city adopted the housing element included that program 5.5, which I mentioned, that called for updating the zoning regulations to allow for mixed use in the service, commercial, and manufacturing zones without a use permit. Of course, due to the existing airport land use plan, that same update couldn't be integrated into the airport area specific plan. But before I go any farther, I just want to give the boundaries mostly for the benefit of those who are not familiar with the area. It essentially covers the area between Higuera and Broad, north of Buckley, south of Meisner, which is basically the same alignment as Industrial Way. So it's a large area, covers a large 1,200 acres roughly. So in 2021, the airport land use plan was updated, and it did remove the limitation on residential density within air safety zone 6. That's basically the general traffic pattern area, which covers most of the site. The removal of these restrictions provided an opportunity to consider mixed use within the specific plan, and that's why we're doing this today. And also, as I said, from 2023, the financial plan from 2023 to 2025, the council included the work program 3.1.c, which is what we're embarking on today to address these issues. Now, based on these various updates, as well as the city's goals and policies and programs, here's what we have: an amendment to the specific plan, which is included in the language of the ordinance, which is part of your attachment. Get into that in a bit. And of course, as I say, one thing that's important here is the allowed uses would be restricted to safety zone 6 with a conditional use permit. I do want to explain why a conditional use permit is something we propose here. Before I do that, I just want to show where it would apply generally. The gray areas here are the CS and M zones, mostly on the western and eastern fringes of the specific plan area. These are areas, and if you overlay that with the pink is the traffic pattern zone to which this would apply. And I think the next slide shows exactly the areas we're talking about. So anything outlined in black is where this could apply. That's roughly 340 acres, plus or minus. And of that, I'd say 2/3 of that is at least partially developed. The other third is vacant, but we wouldn't restrict it just to the vacant lands. It could be an expansion of existing uses or a change to existing uses. So an important part of this is the fiscal analysis that went into this. We worked with Cosmont, a consultant, to look at this closely because, and this is critical, the existing tax sharing agreement between the city and the county, when it was annexed, specifies there will be no or limited property tax in favor of the city. That's why this is a unique situation compared to other places in the city to determine fiscal neutrality. The city's at a relative disadvantage to the county for anything that's especially commercial properties here. As a result, allowing housing in this area has a different fiscal impact on the city than elsewhere. And so we looked at a fiscal impact study here to examine the effects of allowing mixed use within this area. We had COSMOT look at two different ways of doing this. What happens if we build it out the way it is right now? And what happens if you do it with mixed use? And so that first scenario, we looked at commercial. And sure enough, they determined, sure, we could have fiscal positive with that. The problem is current market and economic conditions have not shown any commercial development in that area of any sort. So the reality is we wouldn't get any revenue out of that kind of approach anyway, and it doesn't address the housing issue that you actually asked to look at. And so in development scenario 2, they looked at the fiscal impacts of a mixed use concept, and sure enough, you would see some development, but, and here's the recommendations that come out of that, you would see a fiscal negative. So to deal with the because you have a lot of residential, so they had recommendations to address that. They have 4 different ways of looking at this. Any of these could work. One is to create a CFD, a Community Facilities District, similar to what Avila Ranch or San Luis Ranch have to address maintenance and services. One would be to renegotiate the property tax sharing agreement with the county. They thought that's a possibility, but probably not likely. An infrastructure financing district would be negotiated with the county. Again, difficult because you'd have to work with the county and they'd have to be willing to work with you on this. And then finally, some sort of way to have a minimum commercial use requirement for residential projects and mixed use. But again, they felt that was not really that feasible in the sense that it would be difficult to determine what that minimum would be, especially with different situations with different properties. So the CFD is what they really focused on recommending there as a blanket way of addressing fiscal neutrality throughout. But absent the CFD, to get fiscal neutrality would be a case-by-case situation as you come forward. And that could be something that could, to a large extent, be addressed through a CUP. That's one of the reasons for looking at that. I just hit on these. Ultimately, the proposed specific plan amendment does respond to this, as I say, by requiring a CUP to evaluate how the proposed project would accomplish fiscal neutrality. Now let's talk about use permit requirements here. The reasons why are listed here, and I think we just touched on the fiscal one, which is number 4 on this, but to have a use permit here would be the most efficient way to unlock the potential for new residential development. An alternative to this would require an extensive evaluation of the whole specific plan, and that would take a long time, a lot of funds to do that, a lot of time and effort that may not get you any closer to development than you would right now, and I think there's actually some real interest in developing right now and a real impetus on the city's part to do something along those lines. A use permit would allow for site-by-site analysis related to public services, infrastructure, and so on, and that could be dealt with on a project-by-project basis. Ultimately, limited prescription of standards allows for flexibility in the design of future projects. So again, a CUP could require one set of conditions on one project site and another that might be a larger site or has different issues, could be a different set of conditions. Finally, this wouldn't lengthen the time of review. Now, there was one question raised or that related, I think it was from the Chamber of Commerce, that asked, well, couldn't we limit the CUP such that it only applied to projects with 50 or more units? And sure, that's an option. And in fact, we've created an option, if that's a way you want to go, to consider not needing a CUP for smaller projects, but I'll talk about that a little bit right here. So we're talking about a CUP versus a minor use permit, and the idea would be, if we go that direction, it would be to try to align things with the current development review process, which does show the difference between a minor or moderate development review, which I think the cutoff is less than 50 units, or more than 50 units. So that's more than just an arbitrary number right there. We could do it that way. And if we did it that way, an ordinance amendment could be made that required mixed-use projects that contain 49 or fewer projects and 10,000 square feet or less. Again, these are thresholds that we have in the development review process to be processed through a minor use permit. That change would reduce processing time and application cost for the applicant. And don't hold me to these numbers, but order of magnitude of application fees, something on the order of $3,000 plus for minor use permit versus $10,000 plus for a CUP. And of course, the time involved in getting the Planning Commission involved in a CUP versus through director level review for a minor use permit makes a difference on timing. A CUP would still be required in this scenario for projects that contain 50 or more residential units, more than 10,000 square feet of commercial, consistent with the level of development review. So set that aside and put a pin in that for a second here. Let's just talk about what the proposed amendment involves. And I think it's all the language is attached to the ordinance you have in front of you. And I don't want to go through that in detail, but this is the most important part. These are the findings you would need to make in a CUP. Regardless, actually, you'd have to make these in a minor use permit as well. So there's no less restrictive requirements of a minor use permit. It's just lesser review, let's put it that way. So the key considerations in this, the findings you need to make, there's demonstrable water and sewer capacity. Any fiscal impact must be offset to have fiscal neutrality. Again, I went into some detail on that. That could be a CUP blanket, or it could be individual project evaluation, which until you have that, I mean, not CUP, a CFD, if you don't have that in place, you'd have to do it on a case-by-case basis. We'd have to make a finding there's no nearby uses that generate air, noise, odors, vibration to create an incompatibility with the proposed residential development, and that, of course, would require some analysis. Proposed residential uses are consistent with land use, safety, or noise restrictions in the ALUP, and that any residential portion of a mixed-use development shall be wholly located within Safety Zone 6. And if this sounds like it's very specific language, it is, because it came out of the Airport Land Use Commission review, and it was one of the conditions that we've baked into the amendment right here. And then finally, there'd have to be adequate emergency response consistent with the climate adaptations safety element. These are the findings that would need to be made. So to allow this to go forward, environmental review was required. And of course, what we did here was to do an addendum to the 2003 final programmatic EIR, which covered both the airport and Margarita area specific plans and the related master plans. The addendum was prepared because there would be no specific impacts that are beyond what was identified in the EIR, nor any new mitigation measures. That said, any future projects related to this will have to undergo their own CEQA review. So you're going to know what the impacts are on a case-by-case basis. Finally, the County of San Luis Obispo's ALUC conducted an initial study when they did their update for the airport land use plan, and we used that in part to inform the findings, the addendum for this project. So with that, I'll get back to the recommendation, which I'll leave up on the screen in front of you. And then note that we're prepared to answer any questions, and we'll go from there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was as clear as possible. Thank you. No, thank you. Do I counsel? Oh, yes, I do. Councilmember Marks.
Yes, could you please put that map back up on the screen? And because you blacked out the relevant portions, it was a little hard for me to actually, there we go.
There it was. There it is.
There it is. So, okay, just for orientation, where is Farmhouse Lane and all this?
Farmhouse Lane, you look down on the far right, lower right down here. It's right in there pretty much.
Okay. Alrighty, so then, okay, now I've got a clearer sense of what you're talking about. Alrighty. So most of this land right now is undeveloped, is that correct?
I'd say 2/3 of it has something on it. That doesn't mean it's really developed necessarily, but there's probably 100 plus acres that are completely vacant, and another 200 odd that have something, and that might not amount to much, but that's the ratio roughly.
Okay, and I see suburban over there coming off of Higuera. And where's like Earthwood and all that?
So Avila Ranch
outside.
and Earthwood is right
Would
down
be
there in
outside.
that corner right
Okay.
there.
Alrighty, Thank you. Now I'm a little bit oriented. Good. No, appreciate it.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Boswell.
Yeah, I just had a question. If we were to consider the minor use permit approach, could the director kick that up to a conditional use permit if they felt there were larger questions to be answered or the financing mechanism might be complicated?
Short answer is yes. And it will be a case by case, how complicated in the evaluation of the director.
Hi. And just to add on to that, I think where we landed is a really elegant solution to this issue. You know, we first came forward with just a CUP because we want this level of review. Again, to John's point, this was not an area that was contemplated for housing for a very long time. And so I think I understand the concerns from the community of why is this treated differently, and I think we outlined some of the reasons why, but there could also be compatibility issues with uses that have been existing for many, many years that just inherently aren't that compatible with housing. So there's the ability to put conditions on projects. And one of the things that I like about this minor use permit and CUP, depending on the size and scale of the project, is that the director then has the discretion, if it's controversial or there are unique things that need to be further discussed, to send it to the Planning Commission for their consideration. So I think it both provides flexibility for an applicant who wants to do something smaller and for the city to ensure that we're getting high quality projects.
Thank you. That's my only question.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Francis.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Boswell. That was my question as well. I do have one additional one about the potential for renegotiating the tax sharing agreement with the county. And if we've explored that option at all, and what it would look like to at least enter into that conversation. And if we think that's maybe a big lift from the staff.
I'm going to have City Manager answer that.
Thank you. The tax sharing agreement with the county has been in place for, I think, about 20 years, maybe. And there have been efforts underway for actually the last several years. COVID really kind of threw a wrench in a lot of the work that had been done amongst the cities in the county to update the agreement. The county has actually contracted with a consultant to do some work to evaluate costs and how they can potentially be updated or have the agreement updated to really reflect that share when an area is annexed into a city. And so work is underway. It's just kind of been a little bit of fits and starts, largely related to workload issues and turnover and a lot of staff at levels, both at the county and the city. So the work is underway. It's just going to take, I think, some time. In addition to, not every city is actually a part of the current tax sharing agreement, nor is every city currently participating in that process. And so the agreement, however, that we have in place is really used as the model for any type of annexation, I believe, that happens, you know, between the county and any of the cities in the county. So there is work underway. At the end of the day, I think, though, that whatever agreement is arrived at will need to be seen as a benefit to all of the parties. And it's currently kind of a question about whether that will occur. So
it's a parallel process to
Yes.
what we're going through right now, but it's led by the county. So we're sort of at the mercy of that timeline, and may or may not result in any kind of change to that tax sharing. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, City Manager. Vice Mayor.
Thank you. Yeah, that was kind of one of my questions, but just to clarify a little bit further. So from what you just said, it sounds like this tax sharing agreement is like a master agreement that's used for all annexations. It's not specific to this particular, or is it?
it's not technically binding on cities who aren't a party to it. And I believe that any annexation, I guess in theory, could result in a different arrangement, but it's definitely the sort of status quo and the expectations of everyone going into any kind of annexation. It would apply, the goal of the agreement is for it to apply to any annexation that a city is considering doing, so that all the parties have a clear idea of what would happen to the tax revenue. The goal, I think, is it looks at cost of service, really, to the future residences and uses that will be allowed by the annexation, knowing that the city would be providing a lot of, obviously, new services to that area, and the county will continue to provide services as well. And so there has to be an exchange and a split in a way that helps make people as whole as possible. That's where the details come into play. As whole as possible is.
So any negotiation of this particular agreement could impact others that other cities might engage with the county during other annexations that occur around the county.
Likely.
Yeah. Okay. My other question is about the what came in the agenda correspondence and was a question that I asked about that sparked this conversation, I think, about the minor use permit versus the conditional use permit and the number 50. That seems like a somewhat arbitrary number to me, but I don't know if that's a number that is used in other situations and not so arbitrary, but it seems like a big number to me to have that dividing point at.
So not too long ago, we updated our zoning regulations for our development review process to streamline housing development. So we adjusted that development review to have these different thresholds for minor review, moderate review, and major review. So essentially, moderate review is 11 to 49 units. And then major review is 50 units and more. So we just, to align with what we currently have in our review process, because most likely these projects are going to also have to go through the development review process. The moderate and minor reviews are a director level decision, and then the major projects are a planning commission. So they would be, the minor use permit goes through director review, and so we basically kind of matched those levels together.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, I think I understand. Thank you. My last question is, in looking at the criteria that would need to be reviewed under the conditional, or the minor use permit, if we went that route, there's some things in there that sort of imply a review of traffic impacts, things like noise and emergency response capabilities, but I don't see traffic impacts directly being called out. Is there a reason that was left out, or is that something that we consider in this process and it's just not articulated because it's implied, or?
It's a good point. It's not said there specifically, although it is somewhat implied. That said, this is a good example of where to make the findings that are shown about land use compatibility and air emissions, noise, and so forth, traffic would probably be part of that. That said, we could certainly amend the language here to include the word traffic if it's appropriate.
I think, well, we can talk about that later.
I just wanted to add, we also have requirements in the code for these development review projects in terms of analyzing the VMT and other traffic impacts. So that's not identified in this and as a finding for this use permit, because it's going to be evaluated as part of the overall project as a requirement per our code.
Okay, no matter what the size of the project is, correct, whether it's 50 or under or over 50?
Correct.
Okay, that helps. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Marks.
Thank you. Yeah, I had a question. Would this change require aviation easements or aviation easements? I'm not exactly sure what the word is. Something like, I think it's aviation. I know for San Luis Ranch, every homeowner had to sign an agreement that they basically weren't going to complain about airplane noise.
So I believe it's one of the conditions of the Airport Land Use Commission that aviation easements would apply in this. And I'm not, got to look at the language and it's part of your packet, but I believe that's already going to be a condition that they've put on there that would be
that they would
required.
Put on there.
They've already put it on as a condition that we're going to carry forward here.
I had another question about the definition of a unit. We're talking about like, if say you had an apartment building that had 49 units versus some kind of like suburban subdivision with 49 houses, are they the same thing in terms of your definition of a unit?
Yes, they would both, a unit is a residential unit, whether it's an apartment or a single-family house. And so it would be up to the developer to decide how they would develop their site. There are requirements as part of this use permit that the project is consistent with the city's current mixed-use development standards. So there are some requirements about where commercial is located, where residential can be located along a main street. And so that's applied to all mixed use that we have throughout the city. So whether they're doing townhomes or apartments, it's up to that developer to kind of decide. And they would be required to meet the density for the zoning.
I'm also just curious about the need for firehouse number 5 down there in the area. Is there some kind of threshold at which point we'd be obligated to really build firehouse number 5?
Well, let me just answer that at the high level here. The last finding that needs to be made is that there's adequate emergency response.
Okay.
So whatever that requires, we're leaving it open for the fire department and everyone else in the city who do that review to determine we've got adequate response. If that involves the fire station, that's a question, but we're not answering that here at this time.
All right.
Yeah.
Good. That's all I have for now. Thank you.
And we have the requirements within the Avila Ranch fire station anyway with fire station number 5. So I would think that would kind of go hand in hand, right? Madison City Manager, sorry.
Thank you. Correct. We do have a requirement for a 5th fire station to be built as part of the Avila Ranch development that will be coming online in the next couple of years. It is intended to be an interim station, and so we anticipate the need over time to really replace it with a more permanent structure and potentially in a different location, just depending on how we might best serve the population. It would help quite a lot for this location to have that site at Avila Ranch. So it would likely come into play with an analysis there under that item 5 up on the screen. The fact that there is a station planned for and being brought online, and depending, maybe it would already be operational. So that is certainly in the works and would come into play here as well.
I didn't know if you had more to say. See your light on.
Oh, no.
Okay, just making sure. Okay. I think that's all the questions that we have at this time. So at this point, are there any public commenters, City Clerk?
I have no public speaker comment cards.
Great, thank you. So with that, I think we've had all the questions answered. No?
There's sign language.
There's sign language. Hold on one second. Or charades, I'm not sure. Oh, there is one public comment. One moment, please. Did you turn in your slip, sir? Okay, please do. Thank you. We're going to take a 30 seconds pause. People can put their slips in for the public comment. Just as a reminder, if you have anything you want to say for any of the rest of the meeting, this is a great time to give the city clerk your public comment speaking slip.
Sorry about that.
That's okay, no problem.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and council members. I'm Rachel Whalen, the Governmental Affairs Coordinator at the SLO Chamber. Thank you for the opportunity to provide feedback on the city's airport area specific plan. We want to start by thanking Timmy Tway and the planning team for all of their work on this plan. We appreciate the city's pro-housing efforts and are happy to see the city developing creative ways to build more residential units. Our board would like to offer the Chamber's support on the airport area specific plan update and the housing that it will create. As John previously mentioned, we provided feedback recommending that the conditional use permit process for the airport area specific plan follow the city threshold of 50 residential units or more, and recommending that all projects under the 50 unit threshold be subject to a director's approval. We appreciate the updates made in the agenda correspondence today that address this recommendation and encourage you to move forward with it. While staff's response recommended using a minor use permit for 49 residential units or less instead of going straight to a director's approval, we believe that this is a great step in the right direction to help speed up the process of development while still ensuring safe residential units that are compatible with their commercial and manufacturing neighbors. We understand that building residential units in a place where residential units have not previously been requires infrastructure improvements and funding to maintain those improvements. Our board recommends investigating the potential benefits the city could receive by developing a community finance district within the entire airport area specific plan to help fund the infrastructure improvements and maintenance. With that, we will eventually require increased public transportation servicing that area, and we encourage the city to consider the probable increase in demand from new residents when updating the transportation plan. Lastly, we want to ensure that residential uses in the airport area specific plan will not negatively impact airport operations. Our local airport is a key component in the economic vitality of our region, and it is important that we keep its operation and potential growth at the forefront while developing this plan. Through these mixed-use projects, we should preserve precision manufacturing and high-tech operations that will continue to bring economic growth to SLO. Thank you again for your commitment to thoughtfully planning the future of the airport area. We appreciate your leadership in advancing housing solutions and economic development, and we look forward to continued collaboration as this plan moves forward. Thanks.
Thank you. I believe we have one more speaker.
Robert Truman.
Thank you.
So this is my first time before the city council, but I thought I would
I will say, sir, if you want to speak right into the microphone.
Oh, okay.
Thank
More
you.
for Tank Farm Road than I am for the airport.
Well,
But
Tank Farm
I just wanted to ask what the impact will be on the, any of you who have been to the airport recently know that it's a busy place. They're trying to create a cell phone lot and a number of ways to alleviate the traffic. But how will this development, future development, when and if it occurs, impact any plans that the airport has to expand, to bring in other airlines, and to bring in more people? Our airport, even though Santa Maria Airport is probably, is a former Air Force base, so the runways are a lot longer, but our airport has become a lot more popular. So that's my question.
Thank you. Good question. So one of the things that is always challenging, I feel like, with public comment is we don't get to actually respond back to the person. But it is, I think, one of the conversations that you've already kind of highlighted on, John, or Mr. Rickenbach, is all of the different check marks that we'd have to go through in the review. And I think that the speaking with the county regarding their airport vision is clearly part of that conversation. It may not be the exact checkbox on the planning application, but I'm sure that conversation would be had. Any 2 cents on that?
Yes, I might just add too that this, the amendment here we're considering does consider the Airport Land Use Commission's update in 2021 of their airport land use plan, which does consider future operations at the airport. So it does already account for that. Down the line, years down the road, there'll be another update and we'll have to evaluate it then. But I think we're in good shape for it right now.
Great. I know the county staff from the airport also came to our meeting when we discussed the public transportation and our public transit plan. So they wanted to really work with us and figure out how do we keep the expansion and how we keep getting people to the airport on public transportation. So that will be useful in the future too. Well, with that, unless there are further questions, let's have a little conversation. Anyone want to share their 2 cents first on 7B? Councilmember Boswell.
Yeah, I think I'm going to be supporting the recommendation, and I think also I'll be supporting the new language that's been proposed to create the threshold of 50 units for a minor use permit. I think that makes sense in terms of streamlining smaller projects, and it was encouraging to hear that if the director determines the project's maybe more complicated or has some unusual circumstances, it can be moved to a CUP where it'd get a bigger review at the Planning Commission. So otherwise, thank you staff for a very clear report and good work on getting this through the Airport Land Use Commission, which is very protective of the airport, I might add, and they fully supported this city's change to the code. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Francis.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm in agreement with Council Member Boswell's comments here. I obviously have some significant concerns about emergency response, about noise impacts, about infrastructure, but all of that is outlined in the process that we have here. And so I trust that we'll be able to review those as each project comes in front of us, and looking forward to supporting this.
Thank you, Vice Mayor.
I guess I'll say ditto a little bit. Supportive of the original recommendation, as well as the opportunity to make things a little bit easier in terms of the minor use permit for those smaller developments. I am not totally comforted about the traffic impacts, since it's not really explicitly delineated. So I guess I would want to maybe hear a little bit more from staff about how we make sure that if we say, had 4 or 5 projects that were 50 units or less, then all of a sudden we're at 250 units. And in part of this area, we're already talking about some constrained roadways and potentially emergency response issues. And so I just want to make sure that, if not explicitly called out here, that it is part of the review process. So I guess I would kind of close with that question, I guess.
And I'll respond to that briefly. As any development project comes forward, it has to undergo review at all the staff departments, all the different departments, including evaluating traffic issues. Luke Schwartz could speak to this in greater detail, but staff, I think the key consideration here is staff will be evaluating that regardless of whether it's 50 units or less, and make recommendations and impose conditions, or in the case of a minor use permit, again, same situation there, about what would need to be done. If it's a big project and requires some extensive CEQA documentation, we'll evaluate it through that as well. So it will really be a case of how big or how small the project is, where it's located, and what part of the system is impacted. But I think regardless of the language in here, you're still going to have the same evaluation for traffic impacts from a development review perspective.
Okay, well, with that, then I'm comfortable with supporting what my colleagues have said, and I'm glad to hear that, even though it doesn't seem like it's probably our best option, most easy option, hopefully that we can keep negotiating with the county on the tax share. And I would like to think that they want to see some of the same things happen that we do, so hopefully we can come to an agreement on that.
Thank you, Councilmember Marks.
Thank you. Well, this brings me back to memories of when Carlin Christensen and I were the subcommittee dealing with the Airport Land Use Commission at the time that we were trying to get them to consider changing their airport land use plan, the ALUP, in order to allow the city to develop further in the southerly part, including San Luis Ranch, including Avila Ranch. So I see this as sort of a logical extension. What I wanted to say is that this Area 6 has been determined through noise studies and through all kinds of calculations about if there were to be an air disaster where the airplane would come down, it won't come down in according to their studies, in an area number 6. So according to the takeoff and landing, and I'm definitely not the kind of aero-astro engineer that could ever make any of these determinations, but the main reason that the Airport Land Use Commission did not want residential is because they thought people would complain about the noise. About, oh, well, I bought a house, or I'm renting a house near an airport, and I hear airplanes all the time. Which, you know, I actually like hearing the airplanes myself, so I won't go into that right now, but I don't need an alarm clock because there's this nice flight that goes off at 6 o'clock in the morning every morning. So, so I do think that we need to have some language somewhere about traffic impacts because, and also mobility impacts, bicycle, walking, all these kinds of, they're not just niceties, they're not just amenities, they're also necessary in terms of trying to counter climate change. So we also need to consider like the cumulative impact on traffic. So maybe 150 or 49 unit project might not have such a big impact, but then if you get 3 or 4 of them and going at once or later on, we need to in some way look at the cumulative impact on what is it we're actually doing there. And also the cost to the city, that's a big question to me because after Prop 13, residential development does not pay for itself. I think we do need a CFD. The question of whether you could have one that covered the entire airport area, specific plan area, I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure. I don't know that much about CFDs. If it's a special benefit unit, a special benefit district, usually that's quite well defined, or like a street lighting, you know, they would have them for sidewalks or street lights or roads or whatever, but it's usually quite defined to the project. So could you make that a requirement for the whole area? And would they all be the same thing? Because they would be geographically separate from each other. So it's not, you could have one neighborhood that would have a higher rate and another one that would have a lower rate. So I think that needs to be explored further. And I like the new language and the idea of the minor use or the CUP kind of being a wobbler depending on the degree of scrutiny that's really, really necessary. Given the nature of the project, what we're looking at. My hope, of course, is that there'd be a lot of affordable housing down there and fewer mega mansions. So with that, I will be supporting the project.
Thank you, Mr. Rickenbach. Did you want to answer?
Just a brief, those are good comments. I just want to briefly touch on the CFD issue a little bit. The fact that this doesn't set up a CFD per se doesn't preclude it from happening. What it does say is that projects need to be fiscally neutral. Now, setting up a CFD could be done. It's a process, and it's a bigger deal to get to, just as Avila Ranch and San Luis Ranch had to go through that too. And that could happen in the future, it could happen tomorrow, it could happen years down the road. But until that happens, or unless that happens, then you'd have to find how to find fiscal neutrality on a project-by-project basis, which could be done as well. So the CFD makes things more streamlined down the line. In fact, that was something we talked about at the beginning of trying to address this at the staff level. Does that make sense to require it an outset? But we also figured it was very important to get something going now as well to address the housing goal of the city, and then the CFD could be something that could be worked in as time and funds allow for that.
Thank you for that. I sometimes worry that our city is kind of becoming just a giant HOA. Well, I do think that there are some, you know, the issues that we've all brought up, which is, you know, as we talk about complaints about the noise, I know in theory people wouldn't complain because they signed something in there. paperwork when they purchased their mortgage papers. However, I will say that I lived right behind Vons, and people complained all the time that there was a plane going by. So it is what it is, and I think that we have, it's up to the realtor agents or the property managers to have that communication with their tenants or future owners. I think that transit and traffic are definitely two big concerns of mine, as well as emergency response. I know we have the station number 5 in the future, and I know that there's CAL FIRE right there. So it's not saying that we're not looking into that. It just is definitely a concern, because when we hit the commuter time, the traffic that is there, and then we already have 600 and 650 that's playing on the tank farm. So we just, as I look at everything kind of converging at the same time. The other thing is, you mentioned something around construction, and one of the challenges sometimes is when you have different projects all happening at the same time. It doesn't matter that it's a 12 unit here and a 20 unit here. The people that are affected by that traffic and that construction, the impacts are pretty not happy. So just trying to think about how do we communicate about that in the future is something that I hope that staff will consider and Director Tway will consider. I think the other part about this is, I'm fine with the wobbler language. My concern is for future, when Director Tway, retires in 50 years and she wins the lottery, what happens for that future CDD director? Do they believe that they have all the control and will never kick it out to the Planning Commission? Just finding, do we need a little bit more language for the future is my slight concern. But I think we'll be okay for a while, so I'll leave that alone for right now. I'm just telling you my concerns because there you go. I do think that also, though, making government more easier and more efficient, which is what we're trying to do with this, is a good thing. And I think that the staff review process sometimes feels opaque to the community. So if we can help them understand, all those different reviews we talked about today, that already happens. And so just helping the community know what that looks like, I think would be more helpful. As far as county negotiations for the future, of course, I support that 100%. I also know that the county is already at an even worse part than we are right now, budget-wise, so I can't imagine them saying, yes, let's give you some more money, city. So thinking about how do we negotiate that for the future, that is a win-win for all, is something I'm very excited for City Manager McDonald and team to do. So I'll leave that at that. So without further ado, would someone like to make the motion with the amended language as per on the screen right now in footnote 9? Councilmember Francis.
Yeah, I move to approve staff recommendation with the amended language.
Thank you, Councilmember Boswell.
Second.
And City Clerk, can we have roll call?
Councilmember Francis?
Yes.
Councilmember Boswell?
Yes.
Councilmember Marks?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Shorsman?
Yes.
Mayor Stewart?
Yes, and the motion passes 5-0. Thank you so much. Sometimes I'm amazed at the things that are so big in our agendas that actually have a relatively empty room. It's kind of a surprise, and I think this is a really big deal. We just made a big change for future housing, for future changes, and thank you for all who came out, and for those who maybe watch this in the future. So with that, we'll move to the next conversation, which is we've received many emails on, much input on, and this is the potential Tank Farm Road striping modifications and authorization of the advertisement of the 2025 paving project for construction. And with that, we'll have Luke Schwartz and Brian Nelson. And I will say, if you would like to put in your public comment on this, go ahead and put in a speaker slip. Even if you decide to change your mind later, at least it's in there now. All right, we'll move forward.
Madam Mayor, members of council, sorry for being tardy. Tonight we have the, actually we have our larger project for you tonight, the 2025 paving project, but specifically while we have the entire project before you tonight, we really want to talk about Tank Farm Road with you tonight, kind of the roadway striping there. Today we have Brian Nelson and Luke Schwartz who will be giving the presentation. They have all of the information for the entire project, and we can go in great level of detail about any part of it, but we're trying to keep it at a high level so we can get the community input from that. So with that, I'll hand it off to Brian Nelson, who will go through the project overview. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt, for the introduction. As Matt mentioned, tonight we will focus primarily on the Tank Farm Road design alternatives, but we'll jump into it really quickly to cover the primary scope elements. Tonight we will discuss the project, which is primarily paving, with opportunities to enhance or change the existing striping on Tank Farm. The project is organized into a base bid and 2 bid additives. The base bid includes Tank Farm Road from Broad Street to the Orchid Tank Farm roundabout, not including paving within those roundabouts, but some signage enhancements. It also includes paving along Sacramento. Apologies. There we go. That should help. So the map in front of you shows the base bid and the additive alternates of work. So the base bid is shown in blue. And like I said, that includes Tank Farm and Sacramento. The bid additives may be awarded if funding is sufficient and the bids come in favorably. That includes Orchid Road from the roundabout to the city limits, that's shown in red on the map. And then the bid additive B would be Calle Joaquin from approximately the motels to up to KSBY. So looking at our planning context for this project, at its core, it's a paving project. What we're seeking to do here is replace street segments that have reached the end of their useful life. And so in compliance with the pavement management plan, we're looking at arterial roadways in odd years, which is this year. The benefit of doing a comprehensive repaving is that it also allows us to incorporate other plans and policies. And so when we're removing those existing striping and pavement arrangements, or striping arrangements, we looked for the general plan, active transportation plan, and draft Vision Zero plan policies and design guidelines for what we may put back. So that is what we'll kind of discuss. The core of the presentation will be the alternatives for Tank Farm Road. So with that, I'll hand it off to Luke Schwartz.
Madam Mayor, Council, it's a pleasure to be here tonight. As Brian mentioned, if you have questions on other streets in the paving project, we're happy to get into those. There's lots of details in your staff report. We'll be primarily focusing the presentation on Tank Farm Road. In specifically the segment of Tank Farm east of Broad Street from Broad to Orchid Road. What exists now on Tank Farm Road? As you'll see on the slide, we'll kind of break this into kind of 2 segments. The first is from Broad Street to the Union Pacific Railroad Bridge. As you can see in the graphic, Tank Farm is currently 5 lanes along this stretch. There's 2 traffic lanes in each direction, a center turn lane, and on-street striped bike lanes. And as you continue east, the road necks down around the rail bridge through the Brigetti Ranch Road intersection and further to the east with a single lane in each direction. Again, a center turn lane / median and on-street bike lanes that currently exist. So as we start from the early planning process with this project, we say, well, what are existing issues we're aware of? Not only looking at what's in our adopted plans, but what are we hearing from community members that are things we might be able to improve as part of the paving project? What we hear quite frequently from neighbors and folks that use Tank Farm Road regularly is concerns about high and illegal vehicle speeds, particularly on that stretch between Broad Street and the railroad bridge. That exacerbates the challenge of trying to make left turns from side streets onto Tank Farm Road. With high traffic speeds, it's difficult to judge when it's safe to make that turn. And pedestrian crossing concerns, again, exacerbated by the speeds, particularly with challenges with people trying to cross at the Poinsettia crosswalk. That is kind of the closest location to cross to get to the Marigold Center. And the transit stops that are at near Poinsettia, as well as at the Brigetti Ranch roundabout, where we do have existing crosswalks, but have concerns with high vehicle speeds and drivers failing to yield to people in the crosswalks. And lastly, a lot of interest from people that live along this stretch of road in providing a new enhanced pedestrian crossing somewhere along that stretch between Poinsettia and the Rigetti Ranch Road roundabout where there's demand. There's bus stops, there's people going to and from the park, there's people going for walks and going places on either side of the street. There are no marked crosswalks currently, and we've had a lot of interest from the community in providing a pedestrian crossing somewhere along that stretch. Again, looking at our planning context, our active transportation plan identifies Tank Farm as a Tier 1 corridor. It's the highest priority corridors in the city to focus our energy on improving safety and accessibility for people walking and biking. And the plan specifically recommends the addition of protected bike lanes along this stretch of Tank Farm, as well as recommendation for potential road diet, which we'll discuss in a second. And again, interest in improving pedestrian crossing comfort and safety along this stretch of Tank Farm. And looking at our traffic safety studies and our draft Vision Zero action plan, which we're excited to bring to you a little later in September is the current schedule. We don't have a significant crash history on Tank Farm like we do in some other roadways in town. It's not as part of what we're calling our high injury network, the small number of streets that have the vast majority of our severe and fatal injury collisions, but there is some collision history I want to highlight, particularly 2 severe pedestrian injury collisions that have happened along this roadway in recent history. Most recently at someone crossing near the Morning Glory intersection. And we've also had a severe pedestrian injury collision at the Poinsettia crossing several years ago. There have been no bike collisions in the past 5 years that we've been focusing our collision studies on, but there's also, want to note, a pattern of minor kind of solo vehicle collisions at the Rigetti Ranch Road roundabout, primarily through unsafe speeds and DUI. We hadn't had any severe injury collisions, thankfully, nor have we had one at any of our roundabouts, which is one of the reasons we have that as a prior policy to guide more roundabouts in town. So in guiding what types of design refinements we might be proposing for Tank Farm Road, we're presenting kind of 2 primary alternatives. Alternative 1 includes a proposed road diet east of the Marigold Center that essentially extends the location where the road already narrows to 1 lane in each direction at the railroad bridge about 1/3 of a mile west. We are also presenting a second alternative that has no road diet that largely retains the street as it currently exists. And that was largely guided by a lack of clear consensus from the public, as you see in the agenda correspondence. So we wanted to come forward with some alternatives for the council to consider and give us some clear policy direction on how you'd like us to proceed before finalizing our design approach for Tank Farm. We've also described in the staff report something we're calling a hybrid option that kind of combines certain features of Alternative 1 and Alternative 2. I'm not discussing that in detail in the staff presentation, but I'm happy to if there's questions or interest to discuss the hybrid alternative in more detail. As we guide any kind of street improvements, so one of the first things we do early in the planning process is coordinate with our partners in emergency services, and specifically the fire department, the fire chief and his staff, to make sure that not only are we maintaining standards consistent with the fire code, but identifying issues that might be of concern with future emergency response and really highlighted by the events over the last several months with the updates to the fire hazard maps and the terrible fires in Los Angeles, considerations for potential large-scale evacuation needs. We are in the wildfire risk area. As you see on the slide, the CAL FIRE hazard maps have been updated recently, and throughout the city, the areas that have an increased wildfire risk have continued to encroach along the fringes and into the city. The image on the right, you'll see kind of a blue square that highlights the Tank Farm Road corridor. While there are no severe, very high-risk areas along that stretch or within it, there are some moderate risk areas and very high-risk areas kind of east of the city limits that does present some risk for a significant wildfire coming through and potentially driving the need for a mass evacuation using Tank Farm Road. In reviewing potential design concepts in detail with SLO Fire Department, a couple of key findings and recommendations were presented to guide our design work. First, even with the proposed road diet along a short stretch of Tank Farm, there wasn't a concern that would present a significant concern in the ability to evacuate along Tank Farm Road in the event of a large-scale wildfire. However, there was a recommendation to omit any potential vertical features to provide protected bike lanes out of concern that would narrow the functional width of the road and potentially create challenges with a large-scale evacuation with the need to get multiple, de facto lanes of traffic exiting, most likely westbound kind of towards Broad Street. So as you'll see in the designs, we're not proposing vertical elements as recommended in the ATP for that reason. There's also interest in providing lane widths that are above our minimum standards, which is 10 feet, to add more flexibility for large vehicles like fire trucks to be able to pass through the roadway comfortably. And lastly, as we mentioned in previous discussions, if we have large-scale evacuation events, the bottleneck points are most likely going to be where you already see congestion during the peak commute times. It's going to be at those signalized intersections where people are trying to get into major routes out of the area. So in the case of a large-scale evacuation on Tank Farm, where you're going to see a choke point is likely going to be at that broad Tank Farm signalized intersection. And one of our recommendations, and I think there's mutual interest in Public Works and our emergency service providers, is to be developing some specialized traffic signal timing plans that can be activated if there's an event that prioritize flushing traffic out in the direction that's most likely going to be having that evacuation demand. So that's something we plan to be working on regardless of what alternatives are advanced as part of this paving project. There's also some common features that are the same for each of the alternatives we're presenting, so I'll cover those first before getting into the differences. Is in addition to the primary purposes of the project, which is fixing the pavement, we'll have several ADA curb ramp upgrades along Tank Farm Road. We're recommending new street lights at the Poinsettia and Warrengory intersections to meet our lighting standards. We're recommending speed feedback signs along the corridor, both west of the railroad bridge and east of the railroad bridge, to try to encourage safer speeds along these stretches of road. You'll see there's green bike lane markings at conflict areas, at intersections and driveways. Also want to note, we're recommending conversion of what is currently a dedicated right turn only lane westbound on Tank Farm at the Broad Street signal to a shared through right. It improves traffic operations and also reduces the need for cyclists to kind of weave across the outside lane if they're wanting to go straight. And then lastly, I'll just say, east of the rail bridge, the designs are exactly the same for Alternative 1 and Alternative 2, and I'll show you what that looks like. As I mentioned, Tank Farm Road's one lane in each direction east of the rail bridge. We're keeping it that way. We are tightening up some traffic lane widths and adding some stripe buffers to separate cyclists and people walking on the sidewalks from vehicle traffic. As I mentioned, we've had some concerns about pedestrian crossing comfort and safety at the Rigetti Ranch roundabout. What we're recommending is a few things. One is push-button flashing beacons at the crosswalks that cross Tank Farm Road to add extra visibility when someone's entering the crosswalk. We're recommending additional warning signs with yellow beacons on the approaches to encourage drivers to be aware that there's a roundabout and to slow their speeds. And we've also had a lot of interest, including from the ATC, in doing other things that might be possible within a paving project to try to slow speeds through the roundabout. We've spent quite a bit of time looking at striping modifications and things that could be done without rebuilding the roundabout itself. We don't think there's a perfect solution, but we're happy to focus on that some more as we finalize the designs to see if there's some minor tweaks that might help with reducing those speeds. And lastly, there's some vegetation trimming that we've done already and are also continuing to work on with our maintenance team and with the Rigetti Ranch HOA to improve visibility just in general approaching and driving through the roundabout. Now I'll focus on the two alternatives we're presenting where they differ, which is on that western stretch between Broad Street and the railroad bridge. The first one that we're calling Alternative 1, as I mentioned, recommends a road diet where we would reduce from 2 lanes to 1 in each direction, starting east of the Marigold Center. Between Broad Street and the Marigold Center, the street would look almost exactly as it does now. We're recommending to retain 2 lanes in each direction as currently exists because the traffic volumes are higher. You need room for queuing at the signalized intersection. There's a lot of activity in and out of the driveways there. We're not recommending any changes to the lane configurations on that first stretch. However, as we continue east past the Marigold Center, we're recommending to neck down to a single lane in each direction. The cross section would basically look like you see in this graphic, which just adds that freed up space for a wider center turn lane, which helps with emergency vehicles bypassing traffic. It also adds additional space for the bike lanes and a striped wide buffer to add space between moving traffic and people that are riding by bicycle or walking on the sidewalks. The slide here just shows some excerpts from the design concepts. As you see on the upper side is the first stretch of the corridor starting east from Broad Street. You see the eastbound lane narrow to one lane. And then as you get to the Poinsettia intersection, a couple things I want to highlight. In addition to reducing the number of through lanes, we're also recommending to shift the crosswalk, which is currently on the west side of the intersection, to the east side. There's a couple of primary reasons for that. One is the left turning traffic coming from the south side of Poinsettia is much heavier, so you have more conflicting turns across the crosswalk when drivers are attempting to turn onto Tank Farm. In fact, one of the severe injury collisions we've had at that crosswalk was from someone turning left from the side street. The turning traffic is about 10 times greater on the south side than coming from the north side, so shifting that crosswalk reduces that conflict. It also, we have kind of a wide striped median on the east leg, so there's potential to kind of treat that area as a refuge. If you're a pedestrian, you can cross each direction of traffic kind of one at a time to just give you a little more comfort. Also, we have existing street lighting on the east side. We don't have any lighting on the west side where the current crosswalk is, so there's some value in improving the visibility. And then lastly, another justification for that is as drivers are heading eastbound, they're drawing their attention to which lane they're in, potentially merging down to one lane, looking for traffic coming in out of the Marigold Center driveway. And we want to give them more space to shift their attention back to what's in front of them in terms of the intersection and potential pedestrian conflicts. We'd be retaining the beacon systems that currently exist at Poinsettia and reinstalling them with the new crosswalk. As you continue east with alternative 1, you'll see we're recommending radar speed feedback signs along both directions of Tank Farm Road. The other change that you'll notice with this alternative is at the intersection of Tank Farm and Morning Glory, we are recommending addition of a new marked crosswalk with additional safety features, including additional street lighting, flashing beacon systems, as we have currently at the Poinsettia crossing, and high visibility crosswalk markings. And then as we continue east, you'll see the dashed line here represents that rail bridge. As I just want to note, we're recommending additional signs discouraging pedestrians from trying to cross Tank Farm near the rail bridge. The sight lines are poor. It's not a good place to cross. And also recommending addition of an advance warning beacon so that if you're coming westbound on Tank Farm down the hill from the Getty Ranch roundabout, if someone's entering the crosswalk at Morning Glory, there's another beacon upstream that flashes when someone hits that button to give drivers even more warning coming down that hill to be cautious as they continue that direction. Will a road diet work? Will it cause congestion? Can it work with the volumes that are on Tank Farm Road? We've had a traffic study prepared for the proposed road diet alternative that looked not just at current conditions, but what's this going to look like in 20 plus years as the rest of the city builds out per our current land use plans. And what we're finding is that with the road diet, there's no traffic operations impacts. There are no intersections or locations where there's levels of service or delays that exceed our thresholds. And in fact, the volumes now and into the future are still well below the kind of upper threshold that is typically recommended for a 3-lane road diet. We've had successful road diets in other locations in town on streets that all have higher volumes than what we currently see on Tank Farm. So based on our experience and kind of national best practice, we think this is a good street for this recommendation. The advantages and disadvantages of alternative 1, I mean, the primary advantage is safety. Road diets are a proven countermeasure. They've been proven to reduce collision frequency and severity and get those high-end speeds down. They're also really effective at improving pedestrian safety. I want to highlight the image on the right. One of the things that gives us a lot of heartburn with uncontrolled pedestrian crossings on multi-lane arterial streets is the potential for what we call a multiple threat collision. It's a scenario where you might have a single driver yield to someone in the crosswalk while the driver in the lane next to them either doesn't see them or chooses not to yield and blows through. It increases the potential for a really severe collision, and it's something we really like to avoid. The road diet eliminates that second lane in each direction, so you have a lot less potential for someone to be continuing through the intersection without the pedestrian being seen. We think this has the highest potential to reduce the speeding concerns that we've been seeing. And lastly, based on our review with our emergency services providers, we don't feel like the road diet alternative presents a significant concern in terms of emergency access or evacuation ability, and it also can easily be undone. The improvements that were proposed would be designed in a way that in 20 years, if the street's being repaved again or a future council decides that it should be returned to 4 lanes, it can be done relatively easily. The disadvantages are really, it's a change. So people that are using the street regularly, it's going to look different. There's going to be a learning curve with getting used to the merge and seeing the new roadway striping. And it preserves less of that excess traffic capacity if our land use plans change and we want to build a lot more housing in this part of town, or if we do have a large-scale event, it could add a slight bit of delay. But as I mentioned, the bottleneck's not going to be at this location. It's likely going to be downstream, and we don't see that as a significant concern. Now I'm going to shift to alternative 2, which I mentioned largely retains the striping that exists currently on this stretch of Tank Farm Road, which again is 2 lanes in each direction, a center turn lane, and on-street striped bike lanes. This design concept looks almost exactly as what you'd see driving Tank Farm Road right now, with some minor refinements, including the green bike lane markings at conflict areas. Again, we'd be recommending shifting the crosswalk at Poinsettia to the east side. And then one major change with this is we are not recommending adding a new crosswalk at Morning Glory under this alternative for that reason I mentioned, with concerns about that multiple threat collision. The reality is, in a context like this, it may actually be safer if drivers almost never stop for you if you're waiting to cross the street, because then you're more cautious as a pedestrian. You might just wait till there's no traffic coming, rather than having a false sense of security in entering the street if we just painted a crosswalk. So our recommendation under this alternative would be not to add a new crosswalk at Morning Glory, out of a sense of caution, with encouraging people to cross there with not as much reservation. The advantages of alternative 2 is it retains the capacity that's out there now and the familiarity for current road users. Also has a slightly lower construction cost, generally just by omitting those pedestrian crossing features at the Morning Glory intersection. It reserves that excess traffic capacity if we do decide we want to grow more than what we're currently projecting, or if there is a large-scale evacuation, there's really no change from the current road. There's still some benefits. We have radar feedback signs and some things that improve visibility and might help reduce the speed somewhat. But the major disadvantage of this alternative is we don't feel like it has the same potential to improve safety and reduce those high-end speeds as alternative 1. We presented very preliminary designs for Tank Farm Road and the rest of the paving project to the Active Transportation Committee in November, and again with a brief project update a little earlier this year. The primary feedback from the ATC was consensus support for the road diet alternative. There was also a strong preference for protected bike lanes on the street as recommended in the ATP, and within that, a preference for concrete or other rigid barriers that provide more physical separation from traffic. There was also interest in providing raised median refuges at the pedestrian crossings. Those aren't shown in the current designs for alternative 1 because there were some concerns in our review with our emergency service providers about the potential to add an impediment to traffic bypassing during a large-scale evacuation or emergency response event. We also had a strong interest in trying to get speeds down on this road, including entering that Rigetti Ranch roundabout, as I mentioned. We've done a lot of public input, as you've probably seen from the agenda correspondence. We've had direct mailers sent to the properties along Tank Farm Road and Sacramento throughout different stages of the project planning, including ahead of this meeting, in-person meetings at the ATC, project website, and other electronic media releases. Well, I haven't tallied the input over the last 48 hours. We've had roughly a 50-50 split in terms of support for a road diet or against a road diet, which is why we're presenting multiple options to you. But the general support to improve safety was pretty unanimous from the input we've been receiving to date.
Looking at the total project cost, as I mentioned before, we have a base bid and 2 additive alternates. So the portion of Tank Farm we are discussing tonight is part of that base bid. The total project cost is $11.1 million. We have funding for $9.1 million. So if bids come in favorably for the base bid plus the additives, we may be able to award more of the scope of the work. But right now, staff anticipate that we have sufficient funding for just the areas identified in blue. So next steps following tonight, based on council's input and direction on the chosen alternative for Tank Farm, we would use that direction to update the city's design plans for the project, and I would use the delegated authority provided by the recommendations that we'll get into on the next slide for that. Looking ahead, once those are finalized, we would advertise the project in June and plan to award in July. If bids are responsive, we would be able to start construction in August or September, and due to the timing of the work and the extensive reconstruction of those streets, we're looking at completion of the project in January or February of 2026. So looking at the recommendations tonight, I'll just paraphrase these, but we're asking council to receive the presentation, provide input on the policy direction for those striping modifications on Tank Farm, authorizing the city engineer to approve those final plans based upon that input, and then authorize staff to advertise for the bids for the project, authorize the city manager to award the project if it's within the funding identified, adopt a resolution to transfer the funding and appropriate the CIP reserve funding to support the work, as well as, and the last recommendation here is to issue or authorize the city engineer to issue contract change orders within the project budget and up to any subsequently amended budget. And what that one does provide us is the authority at the staff level to make changes during the work that are needed due to the field issues or challenges in the field that will allow us to quickly accommodate those changes and prevent further delay of the contract being completed. So with that, we will move to questions.
Thank you so much. That was a lot of opportunities for real alternatives, and I just really thank you for that, because I know we often have those conversations of like, well, here's an alternative, and that's not really anything anyone's going to use, so thank you. In this, we're going to take a quick 5-minute break. I have a few questions for our city attorney, and then we'll be back. All right, we're going to get back to it. Hi. We're going to get back to the meeting. We have a little change. Out of the abundance of caution, there is a small bit of striping change on Sacramento Street, which is near where I live, versus the just typical potholder paint maintenance. So I'm going to step out. You all will discuss the questions and or deliberation of the Sacramento area, and then Vice Mayor will call me back in and we'll discuss the rest of the entire Tank Farm plan. So just wanted to give you all a heads up on that, and I'll pass it over to Vice Mayor.
Okay, so in case that wasn't clear as mud, I'm just going to attempt to repeat what we're doing here. So we have several aspects of the paving project that we're reviewing tonight. We are going to set Tank Farm and the other areas aside for now, and we're just going to ask questions and hear public comment and deliberation and a vote on the Sacramento Avenue portions of this, or Sacramento Drive portions of the item tonight. And so and then we'll bring the mayor back in. So with that, I'll ask if there are any questions from my colleagues on the Sacramento portion only of the recommendations.
Councilmember Francis.
Oh, I did not hit my button.
Oh, it was probably up from before.
Oh, got it.
So Councilmember Marks, your button is highlighted. Was it from before? Okay, just wanted to check. Go for it.
Yeah, can you just put a slide up briefly on the Sacramento so that everyone is clear what we're talking about here? Okay. So is it a simple repaving project? There's nothing fancy,
Nothing
crosswalks,
fancy, but there's a couple of things I think worth mentioning. One, that limits are from industrial up to Via Esteban, so it's just south in that curve in the road.
Yeah.
I think the most notable thing I'd like to highlight is we've had similar concerns about speeds on Sacramento, and particularly along that curve in the road. What we're recommending is also some speed feedback signs. We have some measures along that curve to help reduce speeds, including some additional curve warning signs with flashing beacons to give drivers a very clear cue to reduce their speeds, and also some pavement markings, we call them bots dots, or little ceramic dots along the edges of the center line of the road and along the edges with the bike lane to discourage people from going too fast and crossing into the bike lane or crossing the center line. And then the last thing I just want to highlight, we've recently reduced the speed limit on Sacramento from 35 to 30 based on our latest speed study. So we'll be swapping out the signs in the next couple weeks, but we're hoping that should help. And then I just want to also mention, we had initially contemplated potential physical traffic calming on Sacramento, particularly looking at something called a speed cushion, which is what you see in that image. It's like a speed bump with cutouts for larger vehicles like fire trucks and large delivery trucks. We're recommending to not put it in as part of the paving project, but when we come back with our Vision Zero plan, we're recommending to do a speed cushion pilot project using rubber bolt-down materials that let us test a couple different configurations to see if they're effective and how best to do them so they're not slowing down fire trucks and ambulances and things like that. So we're considering that as something beyond the paving project for this street, but not as part of the paving project.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from my colleagues? I just want to point out to the public that there was some agenda correspondence on this. I did ask a question about the widths of the bike lanes on Sacramento Drive, and just want to give you, Luke, an opportunity to describe. I think I was asking mainly, is there space to put buffered bike lanes on that stretch of road? And maybe you could respond.
Sure, good question. The width of Sacramento varies a bit along the stretch. Currently, the bike lane on the east side that is not against parking is really narrow. The project is recommending to basically provide equal width between the bike lanes on the west side and the east side, and when there's available width, where the street widens a little bit, we're adding buffers, but there's not enough width to do it along the whole stretch.
Okay, thank you so much. And with that, I guess I'll ask for public comment on just this section. Is there any?
So I don't know the answer to that question because all of them say tank farm. So if there are any members of the public who would like to speak, if you'd come forward and then state your name.
If your comments are just on Sacramento Drive and not on any of the other portions. Okay, seeing none, then I'll ask for a motion. Or just deliberations, I'm sorry.
I'd like to move the staff recommendation just for the Sacramento portion.
It sounds like we have a motion, but is there any deliberations or comments from colleagues? Councilmember Francis?
Happy to provide a second, but wanted to add that absolutely thrilled to see these improvements to Sacramento, very much needed in this area, and we'll be happy to see them implemented.
Any other comments or deliberations? Okay, it sounds like we have a motion and a second. Clerk, do you want to call the roll?
Councilmember Marks?
Yes.
Councilmember Francis?
Yes.
Councilmember Boswell?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Schwarzman?
Yes, and it passes 4-0. And we're getting the mayor. Thank you for your patience, everybody, with this last minute change.
All right, thank you for your patience on that. Laptop's okay. So moving back to Tank Farm Road and back to questions from my colleagues. Vice Mayor.
Thank you. So could you tell us what, I know that it's mentioned, you mentioned earlier in your presentation that this is Tank Farm in particular is part of our Tier 1 network in the active transportation plan. Can you tell us what your recommendations tonight, either let's just say alternative 1, and how that differs from what the recommendations are in our active transportation plan for this stretch?
Sure. The only element that's recommended in the active transportation plan that you're not seeing in the current design concept proposed is the addition of physical protection for the bike lanes. It doesn't mean that it's permanently precluded. It means that it can't be done in a way that we feel comfortable with this project. There might be other design strategies that may need to be looked at if there's interest in advancing those in the future. It might be something like widening the sidewalks or providing bike lanes like within what is now the parkway, kind of at an elevated level, or ways that can provide some separated facilities without narrowing what is the current curb width and impacting emergency evacuation concerns.
Okay, thank you. And I appreciate the information that you provided in the agenda correspondence about the various streets that we've had road diets on and what the traffic volumes are on those streets. And it looks like, if I'm understanding this table correctly from the correspondence, that Tank Farm Road is kind of in the middle or lower end in terms of traffic volume compared to Laurel and Southwood and Orchid and High Garrett Abroad, some of the other areas where we have implemented full road diets. Am I understanding that correct?
That's right. Just for comparison, the volumes on Johnson, say between Orcutt North to Laurel Lane, has had a 3-lane configuration that was road dieted more than a decade ago and has higher volumes in this stretch of Tank Farm. Similarly, South Street has much higher volumes in this stretch of Tank Farm. And the latest road diet we advanced on Johnson between Bishop and Laurel also has higher volumes than this stretch of Tank Farm. Just for context, Tank Farm right now is about 11,000 daily car trips on the busiest stretch, where Johnson's higher than that, 11 to 12,000. I think South Street was 18,000, something like those. So this is lower than other streets where we've had successful road diets.
So with that, then it kind of makes me wonder why not continue the road diet all the way to Broad Street if we really don't anticipate traffic being an issue. I understand the concerns about evacuation, but if we don't have traffic volumes at that level on a normal day, what's the issue there, and why would that not be a good solution?
It's a really good question. So looking just at a kind of daily volume or peak hour volume threshold kind of gives you a first sensitivity test of whether it's a reasonable candidate. But in an urban area, the capacity is largely constrained at intersections. So for example, Tank Farm west of here is really like a rural highway. You've got a lot higher volume and it flows relatively smoothly. Same thing if you look at like 227, once you get past the signalized intersections at Buckley and Los Ranchos, you move a lot of traffic in a single lane in each direction. When you add traffic signals that stop traffic, that's where you might need widening for more capacity. So example, even though the volumes are the same, when you get to that Broad Street signal and have lots of turning traffic in and out of the Marigold Center driveways, you need the additional lanes for 2 reasons. One, for stacking space, so when cars are at a red light at the Broad Street, they're not backing up past Poinsettia and half a mile down the road, which we might see if we took one of those lanes away. The other is, as you're coming eastbound on Tank Farm and get to this stretch, you're starting from 2 lanes, you need some distance to neck down from 2 to 1 lane. So you need that distance for that merge. We looked at a high level of what the impacts might be or feasibility of reducing lanes that westernmost stretch near past the Marigold Center, and we were gonna have traffic impacts that would exceed our adopted thresholds at that Broad Street intersection under that scenario.
You talked about maybe being able to adjust the traffic light, I'm not going to use the right term here, but the duration of the traffic lights and trying to alleviate some of the traffic at that intersection that way. But it sounds like that's not enough that wouldn't cause enough improvement in the intersection in order to validate the idea of bringing the lanes down to fewer.
No, not quite. I mean, I think we see some improvements kind of on the fringes with some of the queuing. A lot of it's just shifting priority from one approach to another. So maybe you can reduce the queues in one approach, but the trade-off is you might have less green time for Broad Street and those queues back up more. With what we looked at there, we probably can't accomplish something that would allow us to take a lane on that stretch just through signal timings. And just for context, we've had other traffic studies for private development projects in this area that we're seeing not just a need to keep the lanes that are there now, but to add additional lanes at this intersection in the future. We had a project that was conditioned to restripe to add a second left turn lane from southbound Broad onto Tank Farm, and another that was looking at adding another lane eastbound. As we're looking out in our 20-year horizon, this intersection is going to get more congested than it is now, and we'll not only need the lanes that are there now, but we potentially need more widening to meet our level of service targets in the long term.
Thank you. I understand the concerns about the intersection and the number of lanes there. What that does is it makes it so the bike lane at that intersection between the Marigold Shopping Center and the intersection is basically the same size that it is now. Is there anything that we can do? I know I asked you this offline, and so I want to ask it here in public so that everybody can hear. Is there anything that we can do to create more distance between the car traffic and the bike traffic in that intersection at all?
I'd say within the paving project, we're pretty constrained. We're already nearly down to our minimum lane widths there, and there was concerns with narrowing those further based on emergency vehicles, buses, and large trucks. I'd say within the context of the paving project, one option could be to add the green pavement coloring along that stretch where we don't have a buffer, just to add more visibility that there are bikes there and there's a conflict. I'd say in the longer term, there's likely width within the parkway and the areas behind the existing curb to maybe ramp up the bikes to a setback and off-street facility. And we do have plans in our ATP to look at that intersection as a potential protected intersection, which would add a lot of comfort for cyclists that are navigating through that intersection. Something like that's largely outside of what we can accomplish with the current paving project, but we are, again, not involved, but there is a planning effort on South Broad Street that includes this location. Those are things that could be looked at as part of that.
Okay. I'd be interested in talking more about paint or dots or whatever we can do to increase the visibility and the safety feeling at the intersection. Last question is about the two pedestrian crossings at Poinsettia and Sunrose and Morning Glory. It seems like, just in eyeballing it on some of the plans, that there would be space to put some sort of refuge on the alternative one plans, especially at Poinsettia. There's a pretty green, or not green, I guess there's a median area that's, I'm assuming, is going to be paint, that seems like there would be space for a refuge. Is there anything that we can do that, I realize that there might be issues with vertical features for evacuations, but is there anything else that we can do to create a safe space in the middle there?
Yeah, it's a good question, and something we did look at and even sketch up some concepts. There's physical space within the median for something vertical to create a median refuge. The primary concern was with only a single lane in each direction, as that could become an impediment if there was, like, for example, large-scale evacuation where traffic is kind of forming into two lanes, informal lanes to exit the neighborhood, is that any vertical obstructions might create an impediment to that. So it's primarily under that evacuation scenario where there was some heartburn about placing verticals within the roadway under that scenario. It's something we're happy to evaluate again and take a second look and see if there's any flexibility maybe for something less substantive and maybe not as wide as we might typically want to look at with a median with our emergency response providers. But that was the primary reason why it wasn't recommended an alternative one.
Last, and this, you might need to phone a friend on this one, but if there were a large-scale evacuation, wouldn't we consider rerouting traffic and using other tools to get people just going out from whatever the danger was? I do have a little bit of experience with the Diablo Canyon, evacuation planning, and that was some of those ideas were things that were brought up in the past with freeway on and off ramps and things like that. Is that something that, I don't know, maybe the fire department could comment on, unless you know the answer?
No, I will phone our friend on this when we have Fire Chief Tuggle here. I think would be best suited to cover that, and maybe some additional insight on the concerns with the median refuges or vertical elements.
That'd be helpful. Thank you.
All right, Madam Mayor and Council, thanks for the question. I'm Todd Tuggle, I'm the fire chief, and regarding the evacuation piece, there's two components, and you brought up one of them being Diablo and the protective action zone. So there are designated evacuation routes, one of which is Johnson Avenue, which actually heads into downtown to eventually connect to 101 and head east out of town. So Tank Farm Road actually is part of an evacuation plan that goes eastward first before it ultimately goes north and out of town. Regarding the fire evacuation scenarios, though, the fire, one of the primary concerns we have is northeast wind that's coming down off of Reservoir or off Bowden Ridge. And as that fire progresses down through the very high fire hazard severity zones, the evacuation routes would be down Johnson, down Orchid, and then Tank Farm Road would obviously be one of the exit paths we'd be looking at. So one of the things that we did talk about with transportation planning was making sure that that Broad Street intersection has a strong programmable queuing system such that if there was an evacuation called for, that we could open that signalized intersection up to facilitate the flow of traffic out. Any of the vertical impediments or any of the vertical safety features, and I acknowledge that there is a safety component to pedestrians and cyclists if we have that raised refuge, but any of those refuges become an impediment to increased traffic flow. And so what it does is it prevents an expansion of traffic into exiting that area. So if we have a refuge in the middle, that means we are isolated down to one lane and one lane only. There's not an option to expand out. The other thing I want to make reference to is the fact that we don't have a lot of east-west travel routes in the city. And with Laurel Lane or Orchid Lane and then Tank Farm Road, those are our only two east-west travel routes. So you have to go nearly a mile all the way to Orchid before you get an east-west travel route and then Tank Farm Road. So those are our two predominant ones. And reducing the flow or reducing the speed creates an impediment or a lengthening of response times to those areas, which are, as they stand today, are at the very edge of our 4-minute travel time from Station 1. So that's where a lot of the discussion came from, and that's the concern with those with the additional vertical features, in particular at Morning Glory around the corner or just down past the bridge at UPR. Does that help answer the question? I know there was a lot there.
A little bit. I guess I was more looking at if there were a large scale fire, for example, on Bowden Ridge, and you really needed to get a lot of people off of the Johnson, Orchid, Arbors area, would you not maybe use cones and directing traffic to use the entire roadway perhaps rather than just the westbound lanes to get people out? Would you ever convert all the lanes of traffic to going one direction to get people out of there?
It is conceivable. I would say that our staffing citywide, fire department's going to be busy, addressing the fire. I think in terms of addressing traffic control, one of the things we talked about is that Broad Street intersection can be controlled remotely. So it doesn't necessarily require staff to be, I think I'm correct on saying that, am I? Okay, good. We wouldn't necessarily require staff to be present at the scene in order to do the other mechanisms that we're talking about here, cones or, literally officers in the street directing traffic. That's going to require a much more personnel intensive exercise. It's possible. It just requires a lot of people to do that and make that happen.
Thank you. I recognize it was a hypothetical sort of question that we maybe haven't thought through all the logistics of, so I apologize for that, but thank you.
No, I think honestly, I think it's a valid question and one we need to consider, because the reality of a wildfire hitting that part of the city is not a remote possibility, but a high probability at some point in the future. And we've had those fires. We've had 2 in the last 2 years, and we've had a significant one in the last 30 years in the history of SLO.
Well, at least it's still a yellow zone on the new maps, so I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Boswell.
My first question is, what's the anticipated lifespan of the paving project?
With the full reconstruction of the roadways, we're anticipating 20 to 25 years of service life. So the roads out there are approximately 25 years old right now, and so you see alligator cracking, deep fissures, potholes, things like that. So this is a complete reconstruction of the roads.
Great. Okay, thanks. Let's see. The 2 pedestrian crossings that we have identified across Tank Farm at Morning Glory and Poinsettia. They're only on one side. Can you talk about why they're not two-sided crossings?
Yes, so at points, the main reason is to limit the conflict points. So at Poinsettia, you got turning, the main concern is turning traffic from the side streets. As I mentioned, we've already had a collision with turning traffic coming from the south side of Poinsettia, turning across the crosswalk. So we'd like to discourage people from crossing on that side of the street and limit it to one spot where there's not that same kind of turning conflicts. At Morning Glory, the intent was to keep the crosswalk as far to the west away from people coming down the hill through under the rail bridge where there's limited line of sight. Putting a crosswalk on the east side there would have less distance for drivers to see that conflict and yield to someone.
Is it also because they're unsignalized? There's not traffic signals? 'Cause, I mean, we have...
That's part of it, where we have like pedestrian hybrid beacons or full signals. We typically provide a pedestrian crosswalk on both sides where we have a red light that drivers have to stop at. And that's actually a policy in our active transportation plan, is where we have new signals or reconstructed signals, is to see if we can do that safely so that there's not a need to have to cross the street from multiple corners where, depending on the cycle length of a signal time, it can add minutes to your trip.
Can you speak a little bit about how you do post-project monitoring? I know in some of the projects we've heard in the past, and even some of the current projects that have been completed, that we kind of keep an eye on those, and we will go out and make some tweaks once we see how they're operating. Can you talk a little bit about how that occurs?
Sure. So it's a combination of both kind of in-person observations, input from the community, and then some quantitative data. We often will collect volume and speed data, looking at both the number of car trips, but also people walking and biking along a route beforehand. And then we'll do a similar data collection effort once the project's in and people have adjusted to it, to see if speeds have changed, if people are taking other routes or shifting to other cut-through routes that are undesirable. So those are the typical things we look at. And then another piece of that is with the speed data. If we see speed reductions, there's some cases where we can actually lower the speed limit. Right now, the speed limits on Tank Farm are posted as low as we legally can. But that's one of the first, I guess, milestone points when we do something like that, is we say, hey, can we legally lower the limit now? So it's not just physically encouraging people to go slower, but we can legally enforce it at a more reasonable limit too. The other piece of that is we check in with our active transportation committee and invite input from people that live in the area that are experiencing it, to see if there's things that they're observing that maybe we're not seeing, if we're not out there as often as they are. And typically with a project like this, it's all in striping and things that can be easily modified if there's something that needs to be corrected, but that's a typical kind of procedure.
Good. Thank you, that's helpful. Thanks, that's my questions.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Francis.
Thank you, colleagues, for your questions so far. I really appreciated the discussion in the staff report about the level of service, potential impacts, and I just wanted to clarify, is it correct that the only level of service reduction that we're going to see is on that left-hand turn, a 2 to 6 second delay for a left turn? Or will we see any additional level of service reductions?
There aren't any substantive level of service reductions. There was a finding that in the long-term scenario, the left turn movement from northbound Poinsettia onto Tank Farm could have a level of service issue, not day one, but in the future horizon, which is a major reason why we're including the left turn acceleration lane that you'll kind of see on that lower image there. With that, the delay actually improves beyond existing conditions and there is no impact. So we're kind of pre-mitigating that level of service issue. Where all the other side streets, the delay for those critical movements, which is typically the left, increased by a few seconds per driver during the peak periods, but there wasn't any deficiencies in terms of like the level of service grade getting worse.
Excellent. Thank you for including all that information. And then just circling back to your discussion on the roundabout and concerns about speed in that, was it my understanding that although there aren't solutions proposed at this moment, that you're going to continue to look at solutions as the paving project is underway, or would that be something that would be done in the future?
It suggests a combination of both. There's some minor tweaks I think we can pursue with striping and maybe some pavement markers to encourage kind of wider slow paths. We think the features we're recommending on the approaches to get the speeds down before you even get to the roundabout will be more impactful. But I think there are some minor things we can attempt with the paving project and then monitor conditions after that and see if there's something more substantive. The challenge is on high-speed arterial streets and primary response routes, we don't have the same tools in the toolbox in terms of traffic calming. So putting something like a speed hump on the approaches is probably not on the table or the right solution. But there's other things we can look at. We're hoping that the combination of the speed feedback signs, additional warning signs, tightening up the lanes, the road diet, I think, helps a lot in that you just need, I mentioned this before, you get one driver following the limit and everyone behind him has to kind of also follow the speed limit. Right now, you'll see people heading eastbound towards the rail bridge or kind of jockeying for position and passing each other. So you get really high-end speeds coming in from that approach that we think, while not at the roundabout, the road diet will help on those approaches too.
Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you, Councilmember Marks.
Thank you. Well, I read all of the emails that I could before I had to stop and come to this meeting. So we had, was it 50, City Clerk, or approximately?
Approximately.
Yeah. And it seems to me that a number of them seem to be coming from people who are actually heading toward Johnson. They're not really, they're sort of like going through that area. And then there's a whole number of them coming from people who live in the area who are more the pedestrian. So I'm curious, were there any origin destination studies done on that traffic? Like where they're coming from, where they're going?
We didn't collect any detailed origin destination studies as part of the project. It's something we have the ability to do, but it wasn't something we did as part of this effort.
Okay, but the traffic that is heading, I'd say, heading west is probably coming, we know for sure it's coming through from the neighborhood, right? Yeah, so we can't really come to any conclusions about that.
I'd say not a quantitative as in like X% is passing through or X% from the neighborhood.
Yeah.
But I can't say we have just seen in the past several years just an increase in like the kind of commuter traffic continuing or coming from Orchid Road in the east from the unincorporated county.
Right.
And just generally more people shifting from the 101 to 227 and from the 227 onto Orchid Road and trying to bypass some of the more congested streets. So
right.
I think there's more than you might think are just kind of passing through, but there is a decent amount of trips coming from this neighborhood that feed onto Tank Farm too.
Right, no, that was my thought. Some people trying to get to South County by taking the back road. This is another way to the back road. Okay, and then I had another question. From what I understand, if we did decide to go with alternate one, it would be possible later, if it turned out that wasn't really workable for any reason, to go back to alternate two. Is there any cost estimate about how much would it cost to revert to alternate number two if we did decide to go with number one?
Yeah, there's no cost estimate at this time, but the work to go back to alternative two would be removing the striping, sealing, and repainting. So it wouldn't be significant. There wouldn't be any major civil improvements incorporated with that. There wouldn't be any, repaving or concrete removal or reconstruction. It would just be the striping.
Yeah, the road base and all that would be
all
the
that's
same.
complete,
So it would
yeah.
just be the surface.
If the desire was to revert back to the alternative two condition, what's out there today, it would be best to incorporate that with a future paving project where we can achieve economies of scale. So it could be, any number of years from now, but it'd be a summer paving kind of project where we incorporate that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think all of the questions I had have been answered either by agenda correspondence or my colleagues' questions, so I will move us forward to public comment. At this time, I believe everyone's public speaking slips are in, yes? I'm looking towards the audience. Okay, great. So, City Clerk, would you please provide the instructions?
Yeah, okay, so we have 14 speakers. I'm going to call the 1-minute speakers first. I'm going to call 3 at a time, so if you could line up behind the current speaker, that way we can move through this a little bit faster. So Kelly Alonso, Aniko Alonso, and Molly Zagrodny.
Okay. My name is Kelly Alonso, and we live in the Flowers, right behind Bonds. And I strongly encourage you to choose alternative 1. It sounds like it doesn't really cost a lot more money. There is a consensus that the cars are going much too fast. There seems to be no indication that alternative 2 will actually slow down traffic. There are a bunch of high schoolers that to walk to high school is an hour's walk. So the bus drops them at French Park. They run across, walk across, look at their phones across Tank Farm Road. And teenagers are really not that good at assessing risk. I don't know if you knew that, but.
Thank you.
Hello, good evening. Good evening. I'm also here to support the alternative 1. We've been living in Hollyhock Way for the last 15 years. Our kids were little back then, lots of trips to French Park. Our kids are older now. They go on their own to get on the bus. It's been 15 years of being scared of that road because there has been accidents and it's not safe. People speed all the time on a daily basis, morning, afternoon. Especially in the evening, it's kind of dangerous sometimes of the year because the sun is on the opposite side of Tank Farm Road when you're driving west. So that crossing on Poiseria, even if it has the lights now, it's still very dangerous because the cars are approaching pretty fast with the sun on their face. So, option 1, I'm very happy for you. I hope it goes through.
Thank you so much.
After Molly, it's Beverly Hanson, then Ellie Axelrod, and then Peggy Sharp.
I'm Molly Zagrodny. I live at the corner of Tank Farm and Sunrose Lane. For 15 years, we've lived there and enjoyed the community very much, but also taught our kids to fear the street. And I do feel like Tank Farm is like a knife through the neighborhood between the two sides, and many of us want to enjoy the whole space, and even the people from the new Rigetti Ranch neighborhood, I think, would like to benefit from being able to walk all the way across, as well as bikers. So with my current understanding of the situation, I would support alternative 1 to allow warning lights and a crosswalk and better lighting lit at Tank Farm and that Morning Glory area. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Beverly Hanson. I also live in the Flowers. I hate talking. I'll make 3 main points because I think everything has already been discussed, but slowing down the traffic, number 1, and it's not going to happen if you have 2 lanes going both directions because of, like has been said, I've seen it happen with me driving is I'm going the speed limit, somebody comes behind me, they go dashing around, and I walk my dogs across Tank Farm at least twice a day, every day, and every time, I'm 70 years old, pretty healthy, but there's gonna come a day that I can't get across as fast as I can now. The other point is I just don't understand, makes no sense to me that the only section of Tank Farm from the railroad tracks to farm supply, the only section that's 4 lanes is right in our neighborhood. We divide a neighborhood. And I think the only people that are going to be opposed to this are the people that, not the people that live there, but the people who are commuting through. So the residents are taking the hit for people who are driving through the neighborhood that we pay taxes for, we shop in, we spend our money, we recreate. And that just doesn't seem right. And then the last thing is again, it's the only section that's 4 lanes. It's about a half of a mile. And then it bottlenecks on both sides to 2 lanes. So when we talk about emergency evacuations, it's still going to be as wide as it is now, so people can get out. But then they're going to bottleneck into 2 lanes anyway. So it makes no sense to divide our neighborhood for the benefit of speeding.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ellie Axelrod, Peggy Sharp, and then Myron
Good
Wilson.
evening. Ellie Axelroth. I really appreciate the council's work on this issue. I've lived on Sunrose, which is opposite Morning Glory, for 8 or 9 years. I walk every day. So as a driver and a pedestrian, I'm really familiar with that intersection. I've tried different ways of crossing. When I cross at Morning Glory, I wait till there's no traffic, but then sometimes suddenly there's a car coming downhill underneath the trestle, and it's a blind curve. I go out. Oh, no, not yet. Oh, I go out. I have crossed under the railroad trestle because I feel like there's some protection there because I can go 1 lane and then stop and cross over. I know, maybe I wouldn't tell my children to do that, but. And also I've seen down closer at Poinsettia, people don't always respect that flashing beacon. They don't always respect the roundabout, so it's complicated. So I'm in favor of alternative 1. I'd love to see some kind of refuge, which I understand from the conversation that that's really difficult. Anything that you can do to slow that traffic, I think is going to be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Peggy Sharp, Myron Wilson, and then Garrett Otto.
Peggy had to leave. She was hoping someone was going to read her statement. Did anyone get her statement? No? Okay.
Myron Wilson, resident of the neighborhood, here to support option 1. Tank Farm Road, just to reiterate, is a barrier between 2 neighborhoods. When my wife and I were looking for a home, we had 2 options, one on the north side, one on the south side. We said, what are the benefits? We can go shopping. If we live on the south side, we can have access to the parks and the trails if we live on the south side. We'd like to have the opportunity for all residents to have both, all of those amenities. Second point, people are speeding on Tank Farm because it's designed for speed, particularly downhill. The speeds are far greater. The staff report shows that. And so we need physical, real measures to slow traffic down. The last thing I want to say is that option A, we went to the Active Transportation Committee meeting. Option A was already a compromise because there isn't designed in areas of refuge. When I read the staff report, it says the fire department would be okay as long as there's 20 feet between curbs, so that it acts like a couple of lanes. And when I look at the bike lane width, the barrier width, and the large central median, you could tweak just right at the intersection, particularly at Morning Glory and Sunrose. There would be an opportunity to put an area of a raised median there. So just want to say thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Garrett Otto. I'm the chair of the Active Transportation Committee. I want to thank staff for the great presentation. Luke always does a great job explaining the benefits of taking these streets and rebalancing them. I encourage us to use the term rebalance instead of road diet. I think because it explains more or less what we're trying to accomplish with these rebalancing, where we might be reducing the amount of vehicle travel lanes, but that's to make it so that it's safer for pedestrians to cross. It's safer for bike riders to ride through the corridor. Right now, it's not safe for those other 2 modes of transportation, so we're just going to rebalance it to make it more accommodating for all modes of transportation. I do want to, push for some more vertical elements. Without vertical friction, you're going to still see really high speeds of vehicle traffic. We had this preference of having concrete posts or concrete barriers to help provide more physical protection for the protected bike lanes. But ultimately with costs, we said flex posts sound like at least something to provide that vertical friction to help slow down traffic. Those don't stop vehicles from going. It wouldn't stop a fire truck from going down the corridor. If they need to, they could plow right over them. They wouldn't feel it. So as long as we have 20-foot widths, they should be able to get past cars as they queue up. And I also encourage you to think about how traffic bottlenecks when you have 2 lanes and then you neck it down to 1. That's when people are jockeying for position. It makes it even worse. So I really encourage you to add those vertical elements, add a refuge if you can. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Karen Speaker, Robert Truman, and then Vicki Backman.
Thank you for this opportunity. I have lived in that area since 1986. I have seen it grow from the one on the north side where you couldn't cross under the railroad tracks to adding the one on the south side, but they still didn't fully open the railroad tracks so you could cross. Then they went over the railroad tracks and built the homes. Traffic was a little more because it also opened up to Orcutt. But when they put the 500 homes in, they didn't do anything to protect the lower area. There was nothing really done for the rest of the traffic. Personally, I live off of Hollyhock. It's very hard to see unless you get your nose way out there. You can't see to the left if there's a bike coming. And the cars, like everybody has said, go too fast. So personally, what I'd like to see is that outer lane becoming a turn-in lane and that way the bus could stop. Then the bike lane would go on the outside of that lane, but you could turn into Hollyhock, or you could turn out of Hollyhock, but the traffic would be further away from where the sidewalk is, so that as you're trying to turn left out of Hollyhock, you don't have to get out there and then stop because there's a bike coming, or get out there and then stop because there's a car that doesn't move to the inner lane, stays in the outer lane. So I'd like to see that outer lane turned into a way that people turning in or out, and that would be on both sides, could get in and out to merge onto that Tank Farm Road.
Thank you so much.
So my name's Bob Truman. I live on Wavertree Street off of Tank Farm Road up near the Islay Park parking lot. And the other day I had a conversation with my shock absorbers and my alignment, and they told me that they're really tired of driving on Tank Farm Road. So I welcome the idea of repaving. My issue is really with, and by the way, going through those roundabouts, I think the roundabouts are terrific. But going through there, I've only had one incident, and I'm on that road, and I'm also a bicyclist, so I want to throw out a recommendation for your consideration on bicycling lanes. I've only had one incident where someone with, I think, anger management issues cut me off going underneath the trestle and where the road narrows to the first roundabout. So that has not been a problem for me, at least. The tank farm, I think one of the problems is that 220 Broad and 227 are so congested during rush hour, both coming into the city and going out of the city, that people are trying to find alternative routes. And so they are taking tank farm, and it's become more difficult for me to get out of my street to go down to Vaughn's and then, down to Broad. In terms of so my issue is really, going back to the alignment and the shock absorbers, is really with the finished product and the placement of road plates. Those road plates are about 2,000 pounds per road plate. And if they're not placed properly and leveled, so that when someone goes over it, they're they'll either shred their tire, or they will, the thing it'll buckle a little bit. And I'm afraid, especially at that corner of Tank Farm, and it's Orkin and Johnson has been excavated multiple times. And kudos, by the way, to the latest contractor, and a shout out to Matt Horn for, doing a final inspection and making sure that excavation was smoothed out. It's really now as smooth as a baby's tushy, if you know what I mean. So my issue is really with the finished product, is really getting the road contractors to make sure that they grade properly so that we're not going in and out of holes. And so I will finish there. I think I probably said enough. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
After Vicky, our next speaker is Jackie Parent, Leah Brooks, and then Barry Rams.
Hi, I'm Vicki Backman. I live on Poppy Lane, right off of Morning Glory. I've lived there for, since '92. I've seen it getting busier and busier. I have a dog I walk every day, a couple times. Once in a while, we'll even cross the street at Morning Glory, but it isn't fun. No matter what you do, you need to do something to enhance that crossing. A lot of people would like to cross there. The other thing, I was talking with one of my neighbors. I may have a misunderstanding. At Morning Glory, is the crosswalk you're proposing on the east or the west side? I'm not sure of that. East or west on? Okay, because most of the people.
We'll answer that question right after you finish.
Okay. If it is indeed on the west side, most of the people, including me, coming down Tank Farm, will be that are coming into the neighborhood, they're going to be turning left, which just puts the same problem you had at Poinsettia up at Morning Glory, and that's not a good idea. And we have to turn, if we're going to Vaughn's or the rest of town, we are turning left, and we have to be able to make it in through the cars coming down the hill. If that has, and that would mean it would be really good to have the same kind of extra lane, acceleration lane on Morning Glory. One of my neighbors told me right before I came down here that that's her big worry. She's over 70, and she's concerned with how do I get out when it's 5 o'clock. People are indeed coming around the roundabouts because it's a lot nicer now. I like them too. But I think you're putting the crosswalk on the wrong side of Morning Glory and Sunrose. You're putting it right where people crossing are in more difficulty. I actually cross with my dog and come the other way just to get away from those people turning left, so I don't have to worry about them. All I have to worry about is people coming down from the neighborhood. That's pretty much it. I'm not in favor of vertical things. I saw something that happened to me driving on Johnson, coming down here tonight at 5:30. Sydney has the lights. They were flashing. I'm looking, trying to see where this person is. I'm slowing down, looking. I can't see him. And it was a him. As it turned out, as I got close, he suddenly shows up right in front of me. He'd been hidden in all the signs and all the vertical posts Never could see him until he popped in front of me. Now, if I'm a driver who's less inclined to stop, that person's thinking people are going to stop. So it's not so great to just stick lots of stuff in. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. I'm Leah Brooks. I am a member of the Active Transportation Committee and support our recommendation. You've already heard from our chair, so I'm speaking as an individual. Tonight's council meeting is very timely as the San Luis Obispo Council of Governments draft Regional Road Safety Action Plan was provided to stakeholders for review last month. This plan is a comprehensive look at how the county and its cities can make the streets safer for all users with a goal of eliminating traffic-related deaths and serious injuries by 2050. I reviewed the draft report and will cite several relevant points to this discussion. Unsafe speed is the top primary crash factor in the region, playing a role in 17% of fatal and serious road departure crashes. Pedestrians and bicyclists are vulnerable road users. Crashes involving vulnerable road users account for 22% of all fatal and serious injury crashes in the region. Slowing traffic saves lives and prevents serious injuries. In conclusion, please support Alternative 1, and a big thank you to motorists who drive the speed limit, avoid their phones and other distractions.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor and City Council members, my name is Barry Rands. I don't live in the neighborhood, but I bicycle there quite often. A group of us, I am a board member of the San Luis Obispo Bicycle Club. In fact, I'm the safety director. And a lot of us, at least twice a month, meet at French Park and ride out of there on Poinsettia, turn left on Tank Farm and go on out, turn left again on Broad. And so I really appreciate the green bike lanes. I appreciate also the switch of that crossing from the west side of the Poinsettia intersection to the east side. I think those are great. But the one thing that I was not pleased to hear is that the lanes are still going to be, what, 10 and a half and 11, I think is what I saw. And I just want to echo Council Member Shoresman's concern about, getting that, seeing what we can do to slow down the traffic and maybe narrow the lanes even further. The minimum width, 10 foot each, would allow then 1.5 feet, 18 inches of a buffer zone. We don't, I'm very confident that those narrow 10-foot lanes would slow traffic. We did this when I was working for the city of Morro Bay. We did this on Main Street. We lowered the width of the lanes there and added bike lanes on both sides, and it was very effective in lowering speed limits on Main Street. And so please reconsider that. And then one other thing, oh yeah, the crosswalk that is proposed, that's there, and also the one that it's going to be switched over to the other side. Is there any reason why we can't add a parallel green path across that, across Tank Farm, so that a bike can legally use that mounted, a bicycle? Because right now it's just a crosswalk, and so technically we're supposed to dismount to use that, but a cyclist, we don't do that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to call Jackie one more time, see if she's here.
Sorry, I just couldn't hear you before.
Okay, sorry.
Hi, my name is Jackie Parker. My husband Ben and I have lived on Poinsettia for 33 years, and it's a great neighborhood. There's two negatives. One is Tank Farm Road, and one is airport noise, but we'll talk about that airport noise another time. Tank Farm Road has always been a negative for our neighborhood. We have wonderful walking paths. We have a neighborhood that would have loved for the past 33 years to be able to safely walk to Vons or to go shopping or to get to the bus, but it's a real depressive to have to cross Tank Farm Road. And I give the city a lot of kudos. The city came several years ago, Luke came, and they came up with some ideas they could do pretty quickly. It eventually came to doing the flashing beacons and lowering the speed limit. But as they explained to us at the time, lowering speed limits doesn't lower speed. People drive as fast as they want to drive. I was today driving on Tank Farm Road with a friend who was driving, and I looked down and she was going 44. She wasn't even aware she was going that, but in that short 0.3 of a mile that it's 4 lanes, it's human behavior. So I don't want to repeat everything everyone else has said, but it does affect neighborhood connectivity. It affects how we feel, our happiness even in our neighborhood, and this is really an opportunity. I'm so grateful that City Engineering has brought this forth, option 1, of course, and that you're considering it tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers?
Final speaker.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much to everyone sharing your thoughts and your opinions about today's report and potential options. So thank you very much. With that, I'm going to bring it back to staff to see if you have any responses you'd like to share just for clarification based on some of the public comments before we get to deliberation.
Sure. I have two items flagged that I think some additional information would be helpful. One is a question of why the crosswalk at Morning Glory is proposed on the west side. 2 reasons. There is a good point. There is more turning traffic that would be crossing that path, but the overriding considerations were, 1, it's further away from the downhill kind of blind curve coming down from Rigetti Ranch Road underneath the rail bridge, where there's just additional visibility with having that crosswalk a little further from that curve. That was the main reason. The other is there's just more people crossing on that lake currently, so there seems to be more of a desire line. But if those constraints weren't there, I would agree we'd probably like to have it on the east side, out of the way of the left turning traffic. The other question was regarding the at those crossings, is your ability to add the green bike lane markings through the intersection. And we have done that where we have greenways or other kind of through bike routes that cross and continue straight, where you kind of guide the path that there's peds and there's bikes crossing here. With the crossings here, the movement isn't really, say if you're on Poinsettia, with crossing and continuing on Poinsettia, or on Morning Glory crossing and continuing straight on to Sunrose, it's making left turns or right turns. So that's the main reason we didn't add like a dash crossing the street, is that bikes are likely going to be turning and taking a path through the intersection and not crossing straight anyways. But we do like doing that, and we'll continue to do that in other locations where the primary bike movement is continuing on a straight route. I think those are the items I had that I think I had a couple of responses for. If there's anything else the council has questions on, I'm happy to weigh in.
I think the last part, just a little bit more clarification around the vertical flex posts. I think everyone understands the safety aspect of like cement or planters, but when you think of other roads, like Higuera, we're talking about using flex posts, and it was clear that no problem a fire engine can go right through that. So when you're on Johnson going towards the French hospital, it's like a really thin, tiny, scary little bike lane, but the flex posts make you feel a little better. I think there's that, some of the conversation today is what actually makes people be safe versus what makes people feel safe. And so I think having that conversation of flex posts is what ATC suggested, recommended, and at the same time, we're concerned about that for emergency vehicles and emergency response. So just a little more clarification.
Sure. First, I'll note a flex post isn't going to stop a road car from driving into the bike lane at high, particularly at speed. A 6-inch curb is not going to stop a car at 30 miles an hour from leaving the road into the bike lane. At higher speeds, a curb isn't really considered a barrier. You need something bigger, like a concrete K-rail, and those have their own trade-offs with more likelihood of vehicles hitting them and hurting themselves or their drivers too. There is a lot of great data now that shows that even adding something like a flex post has a pretty tangible safety benefit. And it's not necessarily that cars are hitting them and getting stopped, but that it drives more driver attention. As you start to look down at your phone, or maybe you sneeze and you creep out of the lane, you have something that you hit that tells you, hey, get out of this space. And as one of the commenters had mentioned, it just physically makes the road look narrower, so you feel less comfortable driving fast. So there's areas where, especially in the long term on high-speed roads, things that are more physical, that protect, that are rigid barriers can be good ideas. They also add cost and other considerations too. If there's a street where flex posts can be added in a way that doesn't impact emergency response, we do feel there's benefits in terms of the user comfort and proven benefits in terms of safety. With that said, if there's particular streets where we have increased wildfire risk or a need for emergency response, we'll work closely with the Slow Fire, and if we say, hey, we'd like to do this because we think it improves safety, and their answer is this gives us some heartburn if there's a large event, our first question will be like, are we sure? And if the answer is yes, then we honor that input. They know a lot more about what they need to be able to get places quickly and protect people, and for people to get out if there's emergency more than we do. So we respect that input, and we'll honor their recommendations as part of this.
Okay, sounds like too much Pepto-Bismol is necessary. Vice Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you, staff. Once again, a very thorough report. Like some of my colleagues have said, just really appreciate the real options that you gave us, and let us bat around what the various little parts and pieces are, and help us come to an understanding about where we are individually with all of them. And thank you to all the public commenters. It's clear that you all really listened and read the staff reports and paid attention to the details, and gave really thoughtful comments. And a lot of the things that you said were things that I've asked myself, and including asked staff about. So I really appreciate that as well. This is a tough one. I look at the statistics of this area, and even though it's not at the very highest of our high incident network, it is still 11th highest crash rate in the city, with 2 serious injuries of pedestrians in the recent past, and that troubles me. It's also even alternative A, which I'm prepared to support alternative A tonight, but with some reluctance, because I don't think it goes quite far enough. I think there's more that we should do. It doesn't, it's not completely consistent with what our active transportation plan says that we would do here. And so there's a little bit of me that hates to spend the money without following what we've said is in our plan. And we have some ambitious mode shift goals that we know we want to reach as a city. And the part that gives me the most heartburn about this whole project and alternative one is that last stretch of between Marigold Center driveway and the intersection at Broad. That's the piece that, if I were queen for a day, I would say take that part down to 1 lane too. And I actually see a lot of potential benefits for that with emergency response. It allows for a wider lane, fewer cars to have to navigate around if you have to take an emergency vehicle there. Through there, but I also am not going to argue with what the fire department says that they need at this point. So, and the number of lanes is what the active transportation plan said we would do. So I'm agreeable to that, but I would like to push a little bit more on finding some sort of separation or visual cue to alert cars that there is potentially a bicyclist there in the bike lane, and find a little bit more width if we can. I don't even care. I mean, I'll take 6 inches, and also would like to have staff explore, are there any other options for the vertical flex posts? I know you've already looked at that, but I just want to ask one more time, because I think there is a value in people feeling safer. If they're going to switch their mode of transportation, it takes them feeling safer to do it. And even that little flex post sometimes helps with that. So again, I don't want to get in the way of emergency vehicles or people getting out in an emergency, but just asking that we look at that one more time. Also would like to ask that we, explore the refuge at the crossings a little bit more. Maybe it doesn't have to be a curb. Maybe it can just be something more temporary, something that's less disruptive that, again, an emergency vehicle could roll over, or a car, even if they needed to, could roll over. But I realize that some things with like dots, we have to worry about noise, and we don't want people in the neighborhoods trading safety on the streets for hearing people driving over bots dots all night long either. So I'm sensitive to that as well. Also, last thing is appreciate and continue to support looking for more ways to slow traffic down through the roundabouts. I think you're right. I think the staff is right that just narrowing the lanes and creating the road diet will naturally create some of that hesitancy to drive a little bit faster through those areas. But I know that you have some best practices and experts that you can consult to maybe see if there's anything that we can do just in the short term with this paving plan. Otherwise, really happy to just see something better for all the road users on this area, and again, supportive of alternative number one, with the hope that maybe we can push to just look for a little bit better. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Marks.
Thank you. Well, I spent part of Monday afternoon standing at the corner of Poinsettia and Tank Farm Road, and just talked to people as they came by with their dogs. And actually, my brother lives on Lissom Court, and he's been there for 3 years. And so I took advantage of his having been there for 3 years as a resident, and it was very interesting. Everybody whom I spoke with agreed that the improvements in alternate one would be the way to go. And so then I decided, well, I'm going to try to cross the street myself. And I pressed the button, and when my brother and I crossed the street, and he's like 6'2", so, people could see him. Most of the cars stopped, but one of them didn't. It just whipped on through. And, but we were in the middle of the street, and it evidently didn't see us, or maybe it was this phenomenon you're talking about, that the car that was closest to us blocked the sight of the person in the outer lane. I don't know. But I have to say, I really do support alternate one very strongly. And again, I think it's a way of supporting. We talked about neighborhood health or neighborhood wellness, and I think this is a real chance to help these two. They're all part of the same homeowners association, so it's a chance to help the neighborhood really reunite. In terms of the idea of a refuge, I wonder if staff could, it's nothing we need to decide tonight, but just look into the possibility of doing what they've done in San Luis Ranch. So in San Luis Ranch, there are all kinds of, well, in the middle of the small roundabouts, but also in some of the streets, there are these kind of, it's not really a curb, it's just like a concrete bump that they put in the middle of the road. And so if someone is blocking a road, which happens, they just like to park in odd places, you can just drive right over them, no problem. And the trucks can drive over them. And they do, the construction trucks just go right over the middle of these roundabouts, no problem. You have to slow down, but anyway, there's also painting. I don't think we need to micromanage that tonight, but just look at the possibility, because Tank Farm is so wide, it itself is not going to get any narrower. with alternate one, to just think if somebody were in the middle of the road, if there would be any place they could go that would be highly visible in terms of the striping and, you know, maybe make the whole thing green. I don't know. So the other thing I wanted to say is that I am in favor of keeping the 4 lanes next to the Marigold Center, and I understand the need for more bicycle security there. But don't forget that there are trucks turning there. It's not just cars, it's trucks. There's the service entrance and the entrance into the shopping center itself. So you have these big honking trucks blocking everything. So I think we do need the extra space there. And with that, I will support alternate 1. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Francis.
Yeah, thank you to my colleagues for all of their comments. You know, number one consideration when any project comes through is public safety. And so, you know, we've got kind of a balancing act here that we're trying to pull off. We have an abysmal record in this city for pedestrian and bike safety. And so we really need to be thinking about how do we address that issue? But at the same time, of course, we've got in the back of our mind the risk of a massive public safety event, fire, those types of things. And this feels like a fairly, alternative 1 feels like a fairly elegant compromise between providing some level of multimodal safety while still prioritizing emergency access and response. So I'm really glad to see that we were able to come up with this path forward. And also that we can retain some flexibility if we need to modify this in the future. I do want to say, though, like my colleagues have already said, that I really would love to see some more protection for bikers. I'm hearing what everybody's saying, but let's just keep exploring different options as they emerge. And maybe even more importantly, the refuge for the pedestrians in some form, painted, raised, something that can be driven over in a state of emergency, that's fine, but we need to have something there. As somebody who lives off South Broad, I understand the pain of trying to cross a road that divides a neighborhood. And I really want these folks to be able to navigate their neighborhood more easily here, and also to have a place to stop in the middle if cars decide to blow through these crosswalks. All that being said, I'm just so happy to see this project, and really grateful for all the work that you guys have put into this, and hoping for that 19 to 40% reduction in crashes. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Boswell.
Thank you. Thank you to staff for the excellent report and response to all the questions that we asked in advance. I want to thank the public for taking the time to comment on this. I think we had over 50 comments, and of course the testimony we heard tonight, very informative to hear the experience of people who are using this space every day. And I really appreciated, you heard, I don't know, maybe almost from everyone who spoke, the description of this area as a neighborhood. And so what we have is a 5-lane street. I remember, I think for decades, I've been wondering, why is this road so big here? We can land an airplane out here. At one point I thought, is that why is that? The airport's close by. Maybe emergency airplane landing strip. I don't know what's going on, but it always struck me as, just why this is a neighborhood. It's houses on both sides of the street, French Park, which is used by everyone in that part of town. Why it was such a large road. I mean, that road could carry 30,000+ trips a day, and it carries only about 10. So clearly it was over-designed, probably some legacy of long ago when we were thinking we would develop all out in the Edna Valley. I don't know. But at any rate, so thank you everyone for that input. I'll also be supporting alternative 1. I think this is a fairly easy decision to make in terms of prioritizing safety, particularly of pedestrians who want to cross across Tank Farm. I want to echo the comments of Vice Mayor Shoresman as well regarding looking at what additionally we could potentially do to enhance safety, especially for pedestrians in this section. I'll be supporting A1. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank you to all of my colleagues. I will say that there was a time when the Flowers area was very wide open. I remember when I was in school and one of my professors moved out there, and we're like, who would move out there? That's so far away and there's nothing out there. And there you go. And then fast forward, I lived on Bougainvillea. So I am very familiar with a lot of what was said today, trying to get across the street at different times with different abilities has been challenging, with kids trying to run across as they're trying to get to that bus, or just something else going on at French Park. It's been concerning. I will say that one of the things that we asked for many years ago, not many, but some years ago while I was on council, was how do we make these changes that help us get around this community smoother, quicker, easier, better, and at the same time not at gargantuan costs. And I remember the previous city manager said, well, we do it when we are doing other projects like the paving projects. We do things like quick builds where we can make changes, and you are doing that. So thank you so much. You're showing this community how we can, as I jokingly call them, pilot projects. I know they're much more than pilot, but the fact that we can make changes is something that is huge. And the fact that at the same time, you're saving money and doing this in efficient ways is great. I do think that the strolling part of these crosswalks is remembering that it's not just cycling and walking, it's also people who are in different kinds of wheelchair devices, and it's strollers. I mean, if you go in that neighborhood, the amount of people who are getting around with their kids and or their parents or family and loved ones, it's all different. And so just a big variety. And so I think that the crosswalks are concerning to me if we're not lowering those speeds. So thank you for also looking at how are we narrowing this road as much as possible. I do think if there was a possibility of adding the refuge, I hear you as far as there's a slowing of a bump in an emergency response, that is concerning. So I don't want to cause problems to emergency response. And if you can't get across that road quick enough with your 2-year-old or your 90-year-old or whatever it works out to be, it is hard to get across that fast enough with the amount of lanes, the amount of width it is. And even though we'll be narrowing things, the width is the same. So I very much hear you on that. I think that the turning left at Vaughn's or not turning left into Marigold makes sense. But I also think about we're asking people to still take a left that are coming out of Marigold into their neighborhoods. So that still, I feel like, would cause some of the similar problems, but I'm assuming that you have the data that will tell me that the numbers of people doing that is less than the number of people trying to go into Marigold. Is that correct? I should have asked you that earlier.
I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but without specifics, I can reasonably argue that there's more people turning in than there are coming out and going east.
Right. Okay.
I don't know the exact number, but yes.
So I feel like that is a little bit of the Frogger aspect as well, because you're going left out of Marigold back into your neighborhood area. Someone's trying to cross right there at the poinsettia, and that is a little bit concerning. So just something as we're narrowing and we're lowering speeds, it should be helping anyway. I think most of the things have been said by my colleagues at this point, but if there's any way to look at that crosswalk again at Sunrose and Morning Glory, I just feel like we've heard a lot of kind of, maybe not contradictory, but definitely different requests, and just wondering if there's something we should kind of maybe tie in as you're finishing the engineering for that alternative one. So that's just my 2 cents. And at this point, I am ready to move us forward. Any other changes from my colleagues? Councilmember Boswell. Oh, sorry about that. There you go.
Oh, you were first. I was first?
You were first, and then it switched.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm going to make a motion. Okay. So make a motion to support staff's recommendation for alternative 1 with some direction to explore the potential for some increased safety enhancements such as a pedestrian refuge and flex post or additional buffer width.
Sounds good. Is there a second? Councilmember Francis?
Did you want to add a little additional paint to that Broad and Tank Farm section? I think Vice
Sure,
Mayor
yes.
Shorsman talked about that.
Yes.
I think Vice Mayor has a comment before moving forward with that motion.
Go ahead.
I think the staff probably heard a bunch of recommendations of the roundabout to just, I don't know if everybody was consistent with that, but yeah.
I will second with those modifications.
Okay, can we have a roll call?
Councilmember Boswell?
Yes.
Councilmember Francis?
Yes.
Councilmember Marks?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Shorsman?
Yes.
Mayor Stewart?
Yes, and the motion passes 5-0. So appreciate all the work from staff. Appreciate all of the input from the community, and I look forward to seeing how this continues to shape. Thank you. Well, with that, we have one last item on our agenda, which is our communications and liaisons. I have only 4 right now, so I'll just kick that off. Last week, we had the Cal Poly City Foundation for the Performing Arts Center commission meeting, and it was so many wonderful shows and plays, and you can read all about that. I think the most important part, though, that we took away was that we had to create a subcommittee with the city manager as well as someone from Cal Poly's leadership and the foundation's leadership. There's concerns around how are we going to keep paying the money for the continual maintenance of such a large facility, and there's even questions of like, how do you get to the roof in different parts to fix the leaks? And there's just some different things that we have to continue to have some conversations around. So that'll be interesting, and I look forward to city manager's reports in the future about that. Also, we have the RTA Executive Committee meeting tomorrow. Leah Brooks did mention that, and we will be talking about the what their Vision Zero is in June. And I just want to thank ahead of time for Councilmember Francis for attending that meeting for me. Lastly, I had the ribbon cutting for North Truro that other people did attend as well. I just want to thank again the artists who made that beautiful underpass something safer with the lighting from staff, as well as just the beauty has been so enhanced. It's truly the entrance to the North Truro Greenway, but really being able to go under that underpass and not feel a little unsafe has been really a good thing. Bike Month kickoff was on May 1st, on Thursday. We obviously, as City Manager mentioned, have so many things happening over the month of May. I believe it's 50 different events. And I get to say hello to all of the Hathaway students tomorrow morning coming to school as we walk and bike to school for National Walk and Bike to School Month. I will pass it on to Councilmember Francis.
Thank you so much, Mayor. So 2 Thursdays ago, I had a CAPSLO, and as many of you are probably aware, we're navigating some challenging federal budget issues. CAPSLO administers our regional Head Start and also relies on food assistance, and so we're waiting to see what those final budget numbers are going to be. Just a kind of reminder that CAPSLO provides a lot of services in our community, including the Liberty Tattoo, which is tattoo removal for folks who are looking for a fresh start in life. Heard a story at the last CAPSLO meeting about somebody who had been a victim of human trafficking and had been tattooed to mark them as part of that. And Liberty Tattoo was helping her remove those tattoos so that she could start fresh. CAPSLO is also looking at doing a bunch of improvement for their data collection so that they have better data on who they're serving and what their demographics are, so that we can hopefully have a better idea of where to get funding and how to distribute that funding. Also last Thursday, we had Nacimiento Commission. We approved the budget and got an update that construction on the Nasi pipeline repair for the city will begin once the river flow is reduced, so probably in June. Also, this past Thursday, there was a Take Back the Night at Cal Poly that was hosted by Cal Poly Safer. And it was a lovely program with all of the different service providers on campus and from the region who came together and provided kind of a network of support for people who are hoping to prevent violence. And just this afternoon, we had community days up at Cal Poly, hosted by ASI. Both Vice Mayor and I, as well as city staff, were there to answer all of the questions about local government. And it was a total joy. Highly recommend you go talk to some college students if you need some optimism in your life.
Love it. Vice Mayor.
It was a lot of fun, and they were kind of forced to talk to us because they got a free boba if we signed their little piece of paper. But it was still a ton of fun because they made up some good questions to ask us. So enjoyed that a lot. Let's see, 2 Thursdays ago, on behalf of the mayor, I made some opening remarks at the film festival opening night, which was, they had really good turnout and great little reception beforehand in the historic Fremont Theater. So that's always fun to experience. And then last Thursday, I think while you were at the Bike Month opening, I was at the AngelCon event, which is really cool. I have not had a chance to go to that before and see the student and community entrepreneurial pursuits. The different groups are trying to build their businesses and compete for money from the angel investors. And so I attended that with some city staff, and it was a lot of fun at the Rock out by the airport. And then just wanted to do a quick plug for Thursday. Not only is there a bike breakfast, the bike breakfast of Bike Month at the Fire Station 1. So go get some pancakes made by our local firefighters. And then that evening, there is a Building a Better SLO event at the Penny to talk about housing and homelessness and how housing is a solution to homelessness. So looking forward to that as well.
Thank you. Councilmember Marks.
Got to turn red. Thank you. Well, I enjoyed the ribbon cutting right across from the new headquarters of the Integrated Waste Management Authority on May 1st. It was fantastic there. It was great. It turned out much better than I ever thought it could be as it was going up. I was thinking, what is it? Anyway, I also attended the Integrated Waste Management Authority executive meeting, and we've narrowed the search for the new executive director down to 3 candidates, and the interviews are going to be May 15th and 16th. So that's all underway. And also on the 7th, I'll be attending the Air Pollution Control District Executive Committee. I'm the chair this year. And we did make an appointment, which will be ratified at our next meeting, of Carl Tupper as the next APCD Executive Director. He's been with the district for probably 10 years and has a strong technical background, but he's also really motivated in terms of protecting air quality, and he's a very nice person. So that was an internal candidate, and I think it was a good decision. And then on May 10th, coming up, is the 4th annual sheep shearing shindig at City Farm SLO. It starts at noon, it's noon to 4, and it's really like a festival. Besides shearing the sheep, there's going to be people processing the wool, spinning the wool, and there's going to be a lot of food and music, and it's a family-friendly event, so I hope you'll all come out. And that's all I have for now.
So will Ramalama Ding Dong be there? Will Ramalama Ding Dong be there?
No, actually, they're skipping a year in terms of breeding. So they're going to give everybody a rest, I guess. Yeah,
It's probably good
they
practices.
just don't want to have that many sheep. I mean, so they have, they've got 5 now. They don't want to have 10. So,
Okay, perfect. Had to ask.
thanks.
Councilmember Boswell.
Thank you. Just a couple things. A week and a half ago, I was able to deliver the city proclamation for Earth Fest to the San Luis Obispo Climate Coalition, who took over for Earth Fest. Despite a little bit of rain in the morning, I think it was very well attended. City was well represented there with our transit group and our natural resources, and everybody's out there. So it was a great afternoon in the park. So that was fun to do. And then Councilmember Marks and I represented the city at the Foundation for the PAC. We went to the school matinee program closing program, Frog and Toad musical, which was actually quite good. I was really impressed with the talent of the performers. It was wonderful to see the PAC full of kids squirming in their seats. But really enjoying the show and getting exposed to live entertainment and the arts, which we probably desperately need more of these days. Yeah. Thank you.
Very true. Thank you. I actually remember we had some amazing drawings from students, elementary students. I think they were about 2nd grade at the FPAC or at the CPAC meeting, and they all were so thrilled about the Frog and Toad and a bumblebee show. So I agree. We definitely need a lot more art. So next, we have our next meeting on May 20th. We're going to go ahead and give each other hopefully a 2-week break this time, and we'll see you all on May 20th. Happy May and good night.